Welcome, worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 10 of The World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Tovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Build Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you would like your own works read aloud, you are not only welcome but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. For day 439, the prompt was: what is the best way to artificially light a large indoor area in your world? This comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Nugget writes, the light bulb, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. On, off, on, off, on, off, on. The lights flickered on and off as Victor messed with the light switch, eyes fixated on the bulb in the middle of the room. Off, on, on. Practically instant. No fire, no gas, just on and off. Yes, Victor, that's a light bulb, Emra said after watching his human companion's ritual for minutes now. An electric lamp, if you will. Welcome to the 20th century. I know what a light bulb is, Victor said, oddly snappy. Off, on, on. I simply say because you're going to start a fire if you keep doing that. When was this invented? Victor asked. The light bulb? 1870 something, I think, or maybe the 80s. And who patented it? Thomas Edison. Mother. The change was instant and caught Emrys off guard. Victor's face was flushed with rage and his accent began to lean more and more German the more he ranted. That American swine-glorified businessman has no right. Nine, I made that me. That's mine. Verdammt. Edison, der schlamperst Mutterfreaker. Victor left halfway through, though he could still easily be heard from downstairs as he yelled and threw his possessions around before returning with a worn-out notebook, flipping to a page detailing early prototypes of the light bulb. It was mine. I invented that. I got expelled from university when it exploded. Edison did nothing. The thieving Missrat bastard. Der Sohn einer Hundert, verdammt. Victor threw the notebook to the ground in rage. Hey, Vic, maybe you should... I am calm! With one smooth motion, Emrys pushed himself off the ground and lightly floated to the top of the bookshelf, away from Victor. Don't hurt me, Emrys said, eyes wide. Don't remove yourself from this conversation. I feel safer up here, actually. Ah! Victor yelled, hands pressed over his face and eyes. He looked back at the light bulb for a long moment, breathing heavily, tears welling in his eyes as his fury burned out. I made that, Victor said, quieter this time, and voice breaking. It worked. Are you all right? Emrys asked cautiously. 9. Off. I think I remember Nugget discussing the whole concept of Victor's invention, the light bulb, being his invention truly, but that being kind of stolen by Edison. And also it being, in many ways, the reason he had to end up becoming the kind of person that he did. You get the picture of maybe if the light bulb hadn't exploded and he hadn't been expelled from the university, he wouldn't have had to become the witchfinder. He wouldn't have had to experience some of the things that his father put him through. And maybe he would have lived a slightly happier life. So there's a lot of context that we have now that makes this hit pretty hard. Bourbon the Great writes, Colossi, an entry in What Lies West. Burn bright, mighty brazier bearer, lest the fiends in the shadows take you and use you for their wickedness. The forlorn graveyard doesn't seem big, not from the outside at least. Sure, you see the spires sticking from the sands and you know that deep underground they're all connected to each other. And maybe you put it together a bit when you exit a corridor into some purposeless ballroom-like chamber, but you won't ever truly grasp just how massive the graveyard is until you step foot into a garden. The fog cuts off your sight before you can see the other side. And that fog isn't at all close, mind, but then you see one, a colossus, walking in the distance. That's it. That's the moment when you realize how small you are compared to this place. Gertz Ribmangler, an adventurer. Colossi, plural, are the largest mobile entities in the West, their height being completely incalculable. Colossi are most likely a variant of automata, ancient spirit-bound machines that the old Empire of the West once used as workers. Most likely, at least. Colossi can only be found deep inside of the megastructure known as the Forlorn Graveyard, walking slowly in massive chambers, their brazier faces being the only sources of light inside of the mist-filled gardens. These chambers measure often comparable to the City of Worms, well over 80 to 100 miles squared. Saving the details for the archival of the actual region, these chambers, yes, plural, could easily be mistaken for entering the surface. Above, a dense layer of fog hides the ceiling, wherever it may be, and conceals the distant walls of the megastructure in the distance. The only source of light inside of these massive gardens of hedges and verdant arginine trees are the colossi. Colossi are, at the very least, well over 2,000 feet tall. They dwarf ossuary titans without contest, according to adventurers such as Gertz Ribmangler and Marcus Crawler, reputable sources thus far. They possess marble white bodies stained with orange rust at their joints. They constantly carry with them large polearms such as halberds and spears as they walk in patrol across the garden. On their heads, colossi have a single massive blue flame brazier that's brightness is comparable only to the very sun itself. These massive flames are more than enough to light up the entire superchamber, though there are always at least 3 colossi in any one chamber. Colossi, thankfully, pay adventurers no mind and simply complete their eternal duty day in and day out without reprieve, though it should be noted that some corrupted colossi have been reported to sick hedgekeepers after adventurers. These red-flamed variants are allegedly showing signs of eldritch corruption. As automata, colossi have no place in the food chain and only exist to haunt megalophobic explorers. I talked about this on the short form a little bit already, but I really do love the very Souls-like feeling of colossal fog-filled rooms with giant brazier-headed giants strolling about, lighting the place. Things that are so huge that they're just fixtures in of themselves is a very FromSoft thing. And I think Prewood said he was even inspired by one of the entities from that sort of series of games. For day 440, the prompt was, who is the cruelest person in history in your setting? And this comes from Prewood the Great in the Discord. Prewood the Great writes, Iridine Thaddeus, the dead tyrant, an entry in What Lies West. Pro the Great says, content warning, pretty much every tag here. He's referring to the tags we have in the Discord to sort of give content warnings to anyone who would be interested in reading someone else's post. So some of those triggers are gore, language, animal gore/death, which I'm assuming will also probably be included in this, and just a general warning for probably grim darkness coming your way. Iridine is dead. His tomb is sealed with iron and covered in limestone concrete. His family is gone, save for his weary son. He is no longer a threat to this world. He is no longer a threat to this world. He is no longer a threat to his world. Wars were fought. Cities were burned. Thousands were hung. Even more saw their own corpse as their head flew away from a guillotine slash. Countries folded, castles crumbled, and lords kneeled. Thus was the rule of Iridine. Cruel. Crow, son of Orin, a scholar. Iridine Thaddeus was one of the indisputable rulers over 2/3 of Koros. His family was on the brink of conquering the entire continent before the flames of the Orc Revolution brought it all to a halt. The earliest records of his life start in 648 of the Orphidan calendar as of current writing, that is well over 190 years ago. Iridine began his life as a mere servant to his own grandfather, Gregor Thaddeus, widely regarded as one of the greatest and most just rulers in history. Iridine was recorded as being a most dutiful servant. He was noted as being the most active and professional of Gregor's 38 grandchildren, which eventually earned him a place within the true royal family. His days of cleaning windowsills and dusting the tops of cabinets was long over now, and he began his days of tutelage at the age of 16. He excelled with top grades in political sciences, etiquette, swordsmanship, and mathematics. It was noted, though, at this time that Iridine began treating those beneath him more and more harshly. Being accused, but never proven, of maiming an elven servant girl when she missed a speck on a window, Ira was accused of pushing the girl's face against the window and breaking it, then slamming her forehead into the broken glass. While the injuries were confirmed and treated, Iridine got away without any formal trial or even repercussions. Gregor had begun personally visiting Iridine, though, as his grades showed fantastic potential. Personal lectures with his grandfather filled up every evening Ira had, and his days were spent patrolling both the manor and its castle town beneath. Ira was tasked numerous times with leaving a good impression on the local townsfolk who he might one day rule. Further records emphasize that Ira was nothing short of a terror upon local shops, smithies, and artisan stalls. He demanded discounts, free items, and threatened any who refused with the hangman's knot. Still, despite his failures in this department, Gregor still kept tutoring him and trying to improve his attitude towards commoners. Then, on the 13th day of Callan in the year of 671, on Ira's 20th birthday, he broke into Gregor's bedchamber with a knife. It is suspected that Ira threatened his grandfather at knife point to sign the papers making Ira his rightful heir. While nothing was proven directly, the blood-stained transfer of will in the slit throat of Gregor told the story well enough, but the power now wielded, rightfully or not, by Ira was absolute to any who would oppose him. He knew well enough that nobody would respect him out of love, so he chose to rule with fear. Guards were hung for questioning orders, servants were tossed out of windows for failing in their duties, and all of Gregor's other children and grandchildren were burned at the stake. Iridin's rule was without doubt now. Nary a harsh breath was huffed in his presence, not a speck of dirt remained in his manor, nary a pile of dung or dirt befouled the streets of his city. Any horse or cow who would dare besmirch him thus was beheaded and hung from the same wall as the others. Gregor's territory was large, make no doubt, but by the end of Ira's rule it had nearly sextupled in size. What was once a riverside kingdom on the river Fallow turned into a near-complete conquering of all the eastern nation. Ira led armies of steel legions, commanded summoned dreadnoughts in the dozens, and bribed the northern high elves of Moradesh into his marches. Magic rained from the heavens, steel constructs crashed through walls, and hundreds of soldiers followed behind them. 'Twas a tide of blood that followed Iridin in his wake. Even other lineages were not safe from his desire for more. The orcs were shackled, the kobolds caged and brought to home as pets, the goblins sent to the mines to toil away. The only peoples who that managed to keep Ira away from their homes were the stout dwarfs, who were forced into the same treaty as the elves regardless of their fortifications, and the eastern-dwelling lizard folk, whose grasp over nature completely thwarted Ira's conquest of their great swamp, saving the unknown catfolk and centaurs from his wrath on complete accident as well, no doubt. The Minotaurs were walled, locked inside of the northern waste under the hateful gaze of the Frasmalagragra Mountains. By the time he was 80, Ira ruled almost every human nation, the only two that escaped his wrath being the Church of Orpheus and Crestthram, with the Wall of Luminarch keeping both groups safe against Ira's wrath. Finally, he seemed to be content with his conquest. Iridin found himself a wife in Miranda Harrow, who was, regrettably, forced away from her own marriage to produce an heir for Ira. Ira had 13 children, 11 of which were found unfit to live after they reached puberty. The only two who survived to adulthood were Maximilian Thaddeus and Amelia Thaddeus. By the time the Orc Revolution came around, Ira had turned 98. While we all know the result of the revolution, Ira still lived on to the ripe age of 102 years old before passing on and leaving his fallen kingdom to his son, Maximilian. His 23-year-old daughter went on to become the adventurer Amelia Harrow, who now resides within Harold Green's party. To this day, the very utterance of Ira's name sends chills down folks' spine. The very name is frowned upon, a symbol of a tyrant. No child has been named Iridin ever since his uprising, and likely never will. Really solid, sort of historical-sounding coverage. It definitely sounds like it comes from a scholarly perspective, which I really like. The sort of there's some subtle commentary on how, nobody approves of any of this, but there's also this sort of intonation to the prose that sounds like just an attempt to get the facts across at the same time. There's kind of an interesting feeling to the writing that I liked quite a bit. For day 441, the prompt was, who is the him in the You're Not Him Bro meme of your world? And this comes from The Wanderer in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, Blue Cape, just that good, an entry in Karn. Point bomb incident. Nora Lane was having a very normal day. It was a little hot out. The summer ice cream sales were doing quite well this year. Charles stepped off the train before it headed out. Sure, you might be able to keep up with it, but it was quite nice to just sit or stand for a while rather than running. Tomorrow he would begin training to be an actual hero. Sure, he had trained at home, but doing something in the field would be different, more exciting. His phone chimed. Odd. He had put it on Do Not Disturb. He checked it. It had the Hero Communications logo. Upon opening, he read, Warning, inbound point bomb to New Arlen. Please locate the nearest facility for disaster relief. ETA before strike, 17 minutes. Just like that, a normal good day went down the drain. Charles booked it to the Hero Communications Center. Charles was fast, so the 7 city blocks didn't take too much time. He got in, showed his probationary status badge, and was instructed to enter the Incident Command Center. The room had all of the comforts of a clinical waiting room. There was a person wearing the HC armor staring at the screen. Their arm plates signified that they were high-ranking. The officer greeted Charles curtly. Come in and have a seat. It's looking pretty bad. The officer clicked something, and the screen turned into a globe, tracking a red projectile line. They opened a large comm. Charles was smart enough to know that when over 40 names lit up, his voice shouldn't be added to the list. As he looked over the list, there was the Global Director of Hero Communications, 4 high-ranking HC officers, and about every single A-tier hero on the roster. Really, the only one missing was Supernova and Blue Cape. The Global Director spoke. We have a point bomb heading to New Orleans in about 15 minutes before it hits. This is not enough time to evacuate a population. I've told the press to be delicate with it, but I couldn't get any promises. Since it's a full point bomb, bunkers ain't going to do a whole lot of good. Armor, any success in counter-hacking the missile defense system? Maker, what's your ETA? Armor, or Drake really, his identity was long ago discovered and made public, said, not yet. Whoever did this is using a pretty advanced supercomputer, and that's saying something. Quatron and I haven't been able to get any of the overrides working yet. Maker responded to her half of the question. I'm halfway across the country and headed over. I think I can get there in 15 minutes. Any word from Blue Cape or Supernova? There was a slight bit of hesitancy in her voice. Maker was a powerful hero. She could fabricate and bend reality, turn an entire city block into anything she wanted, but that still puts limits in how fast she could use it to fly. Supernova's off-world, helping install a detection system in the outer rim of the asteroid belt. Blue Cape is on a mission in Sovkreis, the director said. Sovkreis was across the ocean, directly away from the missile. Blue Cape popped onto the call. Sorry, everyone. The caves here were blocking the signal. How can I help? The director sighed. We have a point bomb missile headed to New Orleans. In 14 minutes, this city is going to be a crater. On it, Blue Cape said. Blue Cape, I'm sorry, but even at your top speed, you can't catch it. It's going Mach 10. I'm sorry, Blue Cape cut him off. I'm sorry, sir, but you've never clocked my top speed. And with that, he took off. The earpiece was embedded well and meant to survive high speeds, so it remained. Right, I don't have anything better. Go for it. Armor, keep working on getting the missile defense back online. I don't want to take any chances, the director said. Armor gave a thumbs up and continued doing some sort of hand gesture with the holographic interface he was using. The director gave a few directions to Blue Cape. Outside, Charles noticed that it was starting to get cloudy. Maybe it was a coincidence that the hero who made thunderstorms had gotten on call that the clouds had started to form. Charles checked his phone and reported into the call. Sirs and ma'ams, the press has announced a missile strike. The director almost cursed, but interrupted themselves halfway through. Lieutenant Rook, can you inform the press that Blue Cape is responding? That should cut the panic down a bit. The officer saluted and made a call. Moments later, the TV host announced it and made a joke about panicking. There was a strong disconnect between the room Charles was in and the feeling that the news had. They didn't seem to think that they were in any danger anymore. Charles turned his attention back to the screen. It listed Blue Cape as having reached Mach 12, apparently surpassing what his previous record was. He was making storm clouds in a line behind him, the missile and the city. It made tracking him a little difficult. A few moments later, lightning began striking in his path, ahead of him, and he began accelerating rapidly. Mach 13. Mach 14. Mach 15. Blue Cape's earpiece picked up a temperature spike and lost signal. His tracking data was lost. The director swore. Lieutenant Rook pulled up the satellite footage and noticed something. Sir, we have visuals again, they said. What? How? The atmosphere around him, it's burning like a comet. With the new tracking measurement in place, they were able to pull his movements onto the screen. Just as Lieutenant Rook said, a flare of white flame was visible, leaving a trail like a shooting star. The clouds behind it dispersing rapidly. 20 seconds later, they had his speed. Holy, the director started to say, Mach 20 and slowly increasing. There was 3 minutes left, but it looked like Blue Cape was going to catch up. Maker opened up in the comms. I'm here, she said, panting a little. The director answered, There's a chance Blue Cape won't be able to stop his flight path or that the explosion will cause a tidal wave. I want you to mitigate that. You don't have a hero name yet. Fast guy, I want you to assist in damage mitigation. At this point, we have to just pray that Blue Cape has got this covered. Charles and Maker both responded. Yes, sir, Charles threw on his jacket and ran out the door. It was now fully raining. He sprinted towards the coast side of the city until he spotted Maker floating in her green and white costume. She waved to him. He waved back, and she gave him some hand gestures of what to look out for. With 40 seconds left to impact, they spotted it. In the horizon, a couple of black rays shot out from a point looking like sun rays but darkness instead of light. Maker created a gigantic baseball glove and filled it with a sphere of water, leather, gravel, and sand. Before Charles had time to ask, something hit it, or rather someone. The sphere shattered like glass, but dissipated before it hit the ground. Blue Cape, who had been shot through it, hit the road, skipping 2 or 3 times, but seemed to regain control and stopped right before hitting a banking building. The window didn't even break. It was common knowledge, even if not confirmed, that Blue Cape was a powerful god who willingly exiled himself onto the mortal plane in order to protect mortals. And with feats like these, there wasn't a person that doubted it. As very often happened when Blue Cape took on big challenges, his uniform was destroyed, everything except its flowing blue cape and the kilt he always wore. Charles was sure that any pictures the press could get of him would quickly frequent online forums. He did, after all, look like he was hand-sculpted to look perfect. Blue Cape coughed a little bit, wiped a little blood off his mouth, smiled, and gave his signature half-salute, half-wave. He flew out of sight. Nice. We had some fun descriptions. I could have sort of imagined myself in the operations room there with this sort of displays up, and you can kind of imagine the camera panning or camera cuts to different sequences of different screens of watching Blue Cape on the satellite footage. It was very evocative, well told. For day 442, the prompt was, what do prosthetic limbs look like in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, 3rd generation cybernetics, an entry in San Shikoku Ridge. Produced in collaboration with Vex and Ray the Theorist. The proper entry begins now. Cybernetics and prosthetics technology has significantly improved by the time of the 2060s, becoming relatively commonplace as both a medical treatment and cosmetic upgrade. Previous generations of cybernetics were crude and rudimentary, relying on plastic and metal limbs for amputees and only capable of performing basic muscle movements. Improvements were made during the 2nd generation with greater integration with a user's nervous system. Then, the US-sponsored megacorp Turning Nexus brought forth a new revolution of cybernetic technology. Their main innovation was the use of wetware, completely connecting the central nervous system to all cybernetics on the body. This allowed for extreme transformations that could completely replace entire organ systems such as retractable weapons, blades, and firearms hidden in the muscular system. Often, medical prosthetics in its most basic forms have become so advanced that users feel as if they are simply an extension of their own body, able to sense the environment with them. There are also ethical and moral implications with the gradual integration of cybernetics in society, especially since most are bought either from megacorps or homemade. In particular, there is a major social stigma that lower and working classes, due to their reliance on DIY prosthetics, are at higher risk of losing their humanity as they replace more parts of their original self. Called chromomanic disorder by various media, as well as other terms like cyberpsychosis, it states that those with greater enhancements are more prone to violence, delusions, and psychotic behavior. In reality, though, there is no correlation between cybernetics and mental illness. Instead, those reported symptoms being caused by other factors such as previous disorders, substance abuse, and tampering to the nervous system by cruisers and megacorps. Interesting. So, it seems like Kendamarania is trying to kind of address the similarities to the cyberpunk universe while also kind of defying them a little bit. So we bring in the cyberpsychosis problem, but we actually say that there's not substantial data for this. In fact, it is likely not connected to number of enhancements, but also they don't say that it happens without enhancements, which would be an interesting thing to kind of delineate. Nugget writes, amputation, an entry in Petrichor. A few notes before the entry proper, a few retcons, and a fun fact. In a previous entry that happens between this, it's mentioned that Thaddeus had his prosthetic and a violin broke his jaw. Writing this, I realized that the time frame was too short for my liking. That scene still happens. He's still missing a leg, but he doesn't have the prosthetic yet. He also still gets slapped by the violin, but it doesn't break his jaw. The thing that messes it up by his ending speech happens later. And a fun fact. Petrichor only exists because of prosthetics. Ambrose used to be a D&D character, but specifically he was a backup character. I actually played as William Cogwin, who had a prosthetic arm acting as his arcane focus. I like the idea of how he became stronger with the artificial arm, and how interesting it would be to have a character who took that to the extreme. Someone who replaced their entire body with metal, trying to become a god, or more accurately, to avoid death. Okay, on to the main entry. Merde. Thaddeus hobbled to the back room of the bar. The mold was spreading. That time nearly got him. He poured himself a drink. It was alive, somehow. More than mold should be, anyway. It seeks blood. It seeks flesh. It seeks decay. Edward's yells played on repeat in his mind. He's still alive. Lockhart. Lockhart is still alive. 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 Lockhart is still. His leg twitched and throbbed with pain. He crossed his ankle over his knee, already dreading what he'd see as he stripped the sock off. Rot. Lockhart can control all that is dead, can't he? And the tissue in his calf had been dead for years now. It felt like the rot was seeping into his bones. Thaddeus had been doing what he could, both with the revolution but also protecting his citizens from the mold. It was Lockhart's doing. He was sure of that now. No, the strange rot is Lockhart, and the only person who might know what to do is rotting in a jail cell. Because of him. Thaddeus? Edward asked. Thaddeus looked up in a panic. It wasn't Edward. It was Camille. He didn't want to say friend. The image of Edward getting dragged away crossed his mind. Friends didn't go well with him. But an acquaintance of his, a doctor and supporter of the revolution. Are you all right, monsieur? Camille said. Fine, Thaddeus assured, trying but failing to keep his leg unnoticed. Your leg has been broken for years now. It's fine. It's infected. Nothing a little dirt won't fix. It's going to keep lingering the more you ignore it. I'll manage. Like you've been doing. Yes. The two stared at each other in silence for a moment. He can manage. He's managed this long. Just like every other piece of miserable inertia this city has to offer, the numb pain of his past mistakes is just another thing to live with. I could amputate it for you if you would like, Camille said, gesturing to their medical supplies. That isn't necessary of you. I insist you saved my life. It's the least I could do for you. It's been like this for years. And does it still hurt? No, yes. Sometimes. When I'm thinking about it. It'll only get worse the longer it festers. I can still stand alone. You need to move forward. It will hurt at first, but it's for the best to heal properly. It wouldn't matter. He'd never forgive me. What? What? Thaddeus blinked for a moment. The leg. They were talking about his leg. Right, yeah. That would probably be for the best. Thaddeus grabbed an entire bottle of hard liquor and poured some across a rag. Do whatever you need to. I have no interest in remembering any of it. Glad you could come to your senses. Thaddeus chugged the rest of the bottle before putting the rag in his mouth to bite down and gave the doctor the okay to begin their work. When Thaddeus came to, he was in pain. His head hurt and his leg was gone below the knee. It was already fully healed, albeit a bit sore from Camille's use of magic. He took a moment to trace the scarring and sutures. It still feels like it's there. That's normal, Camille explained. Thaddeus didn't say anything else, but simply reached for his crutches. Thaddeus, monsieur, I don't think that's the best idea. Even with magic, the sutures are still fresh. Don't. There's something I need to do. Thaddeus stood up with his crutches, head still spinning, but there was something he needed to do. The mold was overtaking the city, and the only man who might know what to do about it was going to have his head chopped off if he didn't act. Time passes. It always will. Thaddeus' hair continues to gray, and he finds himself joined by Thalia, carrying a package. Your leg is gone, she observed. About time. I wasn't aware you cared. I don't, but appearances still matter. She placed the parcel on the table and opened it, revealing a prosthetic leg. It was very nicely crafted and elegant, with kintsugi decorating the cover. Far nicer than most prosthetics Thaddeus would have imagined himself ever using. I don't need this. My crutches work fine. You're becoming a public figure. A leader needs to look respectable. I was doing fine before. On a broken leg, yes, how symbolic. But it's time you stand properly. Thaddeus sighed and took the prosthetic, taking a moment to figure out how to secure it to his leg. It had been over a decade since he last tried to walk on two legs normally, much less one that wasn't organic. He was shaky to stand at first, clinging to the wall, table, and chair for support. Thalia offered her hand. I don't need your help, he snapped. Thaddeus reached for one of his crutches and began to lean on it for additional balance, finally distancing himself from the table and chair, though keeping his offhand close to the wall. I think I prefer the crutches. If that's what you'd like, Thalia said, but it's good to have options. After all, Lockhart preferred the wheelchair, but how often did you actually see him using it outside of his manor? Speaking of the Lockharts, I noticed Edward's cell was empty. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Must I go to you with every decision I make? You're a loose cannon, you know. I'd rather be that than a pet. Nice. Really good prose in this one, Nugget. Nugget, you are becoming a good writer very quickly. I like this one a lot. Lots of symbolism, lots of cool stuff that we get to kind of experience, especially with all the context we have. It's great. I Am Crab 174 writes, Tinkers, Augs, and Wizards. The most ancient forms of prosthetics came in the form of using powerful magic to shape things like rocks and plants into a replacement limb. The stronger the magic, the longer it would last, but these solutions weren't very permanent. It wasn't until the city of Aethervale was founded and grew that more traditional prosthetics were invented. Being a very industrial and machine-heavy city, there was bound to be more than a few workplace accidents that could cause or lead to an unwanted amputation. By that time, the people of the city, tinkers as they called themselves, had specialized in creating exoskeletons or limb attachments to better complete tasks or even just to look cooler. Using the same idea, if someone happened to lose an arm or a leg, a prosthetic would be made. The richer the patient, the more fancy and custom they could have it, but they all worked using liquid aether as a way to stay functional. Tubes and vials kept the fluid connected from an attachment on the stub where the limb used to be and another connection point on the prosthetic itself. This allowed for a person to not only easily replace the limb, but also utilize it just like a normal flesh and bone appendage. My main character, Ajax, has a prosthetic arm, which I'll add pictures of because it's a good example of tinker prosthetics. Moving away from steampunk inspiration, the city of Neotopia has a slightly different form of artificial limb. Anyone with any kind of cybernetic replacement or enhancement that has been attached surgically to their body is known as an aug, meaning augmented. Even the poorest person in Neotopia will usually have at least a plug in one of their fingers to charge devices and whatnot. In most cases, the augments aren't a necessity for a person, but rather an enhancement. In most cases, it's not a full prosthetic, but rather something that replaces part of a limb or is grafted in/on it. However, full replacements do exist, of course. The downside of being an aug is that any augment more substantial than tools in your fingers will be something that forces you to be wired/plugged in. Being wired means being in the system of the city, fully exposed SECURE or secure corpse, and its shadowy leaders. Your augments can be controlled by them at any point, and you don't have any say. There is, however, a small sort of resistance force that specializes in giving the government a giant middle finger. Skilled hackers and rebels figure out ways to become unplugged/unwired, meaning they're entirely out of the system. They can't be tracked nor controlled, which is pretty helpful when you're part of a highly illegal and wanted group. As for what an augment looks like, imagine the mantis blade from Cyberpunk. I think that's what they're called. As a simple aug, just something implanted into an arm, but they can be for any part of a person's body, even hair or specialized augments for races with unique features. Basically, just imagine Cyberpunk sort of cybernetics, and that's it. Jason, an aug bounty hunter from my story, has a full lower body replacement augment to make his legs stronger and more agile. One of his dreads has also been augmented into a cable he can use to download and hack things. The sketch of Jason is extremely outdated, lol. He looks way different now, but Ajax's is accurate. Jason's art was done by, and there is a link that I will also provide in the descriptions. It is a TikTok link to someone by the name or by the handle of PhantomBG. NYUX writes, I mean just about everything. The better question is, what form don't prosthetics come in? They're so widely available to all that you'd be stupid not to get one. There's organic prosthetics that are essentially a different form of body part grown onto the injured part, but they're prone to risks and are very expensive. Then there's the much more popular variant, which is the artificial ones. They come in an extreme range of barely functioning rubbish to an entire web of pneumatic tubes under a layer of artificial skin with neural connections for touch and optional pain receptors. The only thing that they have in common is the method of them being powered, which is the same as all other machinery within the faction. Arcane crystals that are heated and the vapor that comes off them is utilized to power pneumatic machinery of varying sizes. Essentially, the final evolution of steam power. Prosthetics, as complex and sleek as the latter, often do need an outside power source, unless the user is willing to spend fortunes on the most durable types of arcane crystals as a fuel source. Cool. I wonder if NYUX has any. I'm sure NYUX has some fun characters, some OCs built out that utilize some wacky prosthetics. It'd be fun to know about NYUX. You have to give us some examples if you have not already. For day 443, the prompt was, what is the most wholesome thing in your setting? And this comes from Pro and the Great in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, Behemoth Sanctuary, an entry in Endron. Behemoths are very ancient creatures. In Endron, they quite literally predate the concept of dirt. As one of the 6 Vashnair, they, as a species, even predate Endron, its time as a courtyard included. They started their arrival as war machines, creatures armored by the Great One, to wreak havoc amongst the plains as that primordial war to enslave and torment everything was fought. Behemoths, though perhaps difficult for anyone who has interacted with them to believe, were quite terrifying. They would shatter mountains, level cities, and could arrive anywhere swiftly, not to mention their insurmountable size. The Archangel of Kindness Valera found them and battled them, but seeing them as victims of a cruel fate rather than horrible beasts, she spared and liberated them. She helped them build a sanctuary guarded by the armor of their enslavement. A beautiful, sheltered landscape was made. Although under no command nor obligation, the Behemoths turned on their prior enslaver and helped to drive her out. When peace was won, the crippled Behemoths were taken to the sanctuary to be safe. Further, the largest and strongest Behemoth was tasked with safeguarding. A Behemoth spanning 4 miles in height and with his hue off-colored, a shade of blue instead of red. Magnervos. Inside, Behemoth parents mate. When pregnant, rest there, and the young Behemoths are born and raised. Baby Behemoths, like their parents, are colossal. However, they are much smaller than their parents. When their legs gain enough strength for them to stand, they reach a height of 152 meters, roughly 500 feet. They love to run around. Unfortunately, managing 10 noodle-like legs is quite the learning curve, so they tend to stumble and trip a lot. There is one crippled Behemoth that can no longer walk, as only 3 legs are present. This Behemoth likes to gather the young ones on its legs and lift them up, akin to power jumping with humans. Magnervos will, on occasion as needed, heave this Behemoth onto his back and carry him under the sea within the sanctuary. He will then lower the injured one into the water to drink, before returning and gently placing back into its comfortable spot. Besides the crippled Behemoth and Magnervos and the parents of young Behemoths, there is a third Behemoth. This one's halo and hue is also shifted to blue, but instead of using the color black to absorb more sunlight, she is a starch white. She acts a sort of matron for the sanctuary. From observation, it does not appear that she nor Magnervos are mates. Instead, they seem to act more like what a guard and a grandmother would do. One Behemoth that typically self-isolates, which is missing 2 limbs and has scarred eyes, also very frequently visits. Magnervos seems to respect this one more than others, but it is very unclear as to why, as Behemoths are very old, and their language, if they have one, is unclear. This 8-legged Behemoth frequently arrives and watches the babies while the parents enjoy time alone. Of course, all of this is happening in Behemoth's own time frame, and can last anywhere between months, years, or even decades, though the latter is rare. Lastly, I'll end with reassuring any readers that the Behemoth infants, as few and rare as they are, in a race that has less than 130 amongst themselves, are well protected. Behemoths that are inhabited by sapients do not visit the sanctuary, nor do they get close. Only very entrusted individuals are allowed to see the interior, and those that do keep its location a secret out of respect. The only reason even an approximation of where it could be is had amongst the public is because Behemoths that are being observed avoid the northeastern edge of the far wilds. P.S. A baby Behemoth is called a tremoth, as a combination of tremor and Behemoth. P.S.S. Tremoths are the same height as one of their parents' singular eye. Very wholesome, very cute, but also, at the same time, a bit eldritch in nature. It's like cute eldritch writing a little bit when you have creatures this tall with 10 spindly, wonky legs that flop about as they attempt to get a grasp on their surroundings. You imagine that if they were not in this sanctuary and they were allowed to freely roam, they could be quite destructive to, anything civilized whatsoever. I also really enjoy the ancient, slow, almost ant-like nature of them that you've kind of described, their comings and goings that are not really understood even by whoever this narrator is, but they seem to be all positive things. Lemmy writes, a wholesome ending. The most wholesome thing in my setting is actually something my players have created and fostered, mostly accidentally, and I extended it from where they left it. The actual entry begins now. Once, long ago, an orphanage stood in the docks district of Trecht, Hearth Orphanage. It was kept by the Trecht Helmite Order, who protected the children and watched them grow and thrive. However, the orphanage came to a fiery end during the night of great fires, when the Hrensun huntsmen took down what they considered a threat. They claimed at the time that it was to rid the city of demons, but the truth is, of course, much darker. From the ashes, the dove and the fawn was formed. It was built to serve nearly the same purpose, but the curriculum, funding, and staff were all carefully controlled by the Hrensun Eight, under direction from House Jakabe. In fact, many of its residents grew into huntsmen. But then, in 150 C, a group of adventurers rolled into town. One of them, Venlig Tarn, was a member of the Helmite Order and was witness to the night of great fires. The group took a tour of the orphanage, and upon seeing the state of things, Venlig donated a significant amount of money to them, 5,000 gold pieces at the time. They shook up the government in Trecht, dethroning several of the 8 who were making deals with demons and putting the city in danger. This changed many things for the orphanage. They were controlled by the 8 largely because of funding and control via government, and so were able to buy their sovereignty from Conrad Wegner. With this change, they actually found a new order of the Helmite Order, and they came to teach and to make themselves present in the city again. The days of the 8 were over, and the orphans of the dove and the fawn grew into wonderful humans who helped their neighbors. The city flourished. The fire masquerade was ended in favor of a new festival, the songbird masquerade, held on the day of Venlig's death as a memorial to the man who changed Traith forever. Hopefully I got pronunciations correct, Lemmy, there, but I really like this. Very cute, succinct. I can kind of imagine the scenario of the moments of the actual play of the TTRPG quite well, just from your writing here, but you've judged it up a little bit with more prose than probably would have occurred in the moment, and it's quite nice. It's a sweet moment that resulted in something even more positive, which when we're playing TTRPGs doesn't always happen. We have a new writer in our midst. Ed/Music Geekery writes, "The Dryad and the Night." They note at the top, this is actually a story from a while back that I'm personally very proud of. Deep within the forests of Ilthadia, past the river of Mivian, stands a single sycamore tree. Next to that sycamore is another curiosity, equal in rarity and mystery, a statue of a knight standing guard. Neither plinth nor inscription of any kind accompanies this statue. To inspect it, one could almost mistake it for a true suit of armor. No hallmarks of a particular mason are to be found, and no masonry guild in the land makes claim to its construction. The one clue upon the statue as to any sort of identity is that upon the statue's left shoulder is the engraving of 3 lilies in a triangle. This would correspond with the Order of the Grand Blossoms, a knightly order dedicated to the protection of nature. Whilst no one knows for certain the identity of a knight who stood vigil around this sycamore, a popular legend has arisen from what whispers elders have and ancient scriptures suggest. A young knight by the name of Kryn was making his way through the forest in the middle of spring when he came upon a lone sycamore. Not only had he seen no other trees of its kind in the last 5 miles he had walked, but it was the single most perfectly growing tree throughout the woods. He was captivated by its grand blossoms, the perfect way by which its branches swayed within the breeze, almost as though it was being caressed by it. He slowly approached it and took time to look along the bark, study its blossoms, and after several hours of documenting and even drawing and writing about the sycamore, he fell asleep within its boughs. When the knight awoke, he was greeted with the loveliest of sights. A young maiden of soft countenance, cherry blossom hair that trailed so long it curled around them both, and eyes of the brightest green. With a voice of the coolest breeze, she whispered to the knight that her name was Laresti, that she would keep him warm, sheltered, and fed for as long as he would protect her. And so the knight promised his vigil. But from simple dedication to his order's ethos and appreciation for nature bloomed a true friendship between he and the Dryad. For the first few months, his order would see his return, but eventually he was never heard of again by them. Today it is reckoned that, if this legend is true, he ultimately forsook the order to maintain his warding and perhaps his friendship, maybe even romance, with the daughter of the Great Mother that he had come to know. There is no certainty whether this legend is true, but were one to observe the statue and the sycamore tree, one would notice that in the rain the branches will move to shelter him, and in the sun shade will deliberately move around him. What a great first entry, honestly. Fantastic prose, very old oral mythology, folk tale sounding, very much like classic fantasy tales. And I believe when they had posted this originally in the Build Together forum in the Discord, they had mentioned that this was their goal. And I think that Geekery has definitely kind of hit that nail right on the head. I really enjoyed reading this. Very sweet, very just all around quite wholesome, lovely beginning, middle, and end. Probably Great writes, Seamsters, an entry in What Lies West. The tapestry folds, and the connoisseur looks upon it with questioning looks and wincing brows. They cannot see past the surface and drown in the sky. Not the biggest fan myself. Never been big on insects, let alone spiders. But I suppose they're all right, if a little incoherent at times. Gertz Ribmangler, an adventurer. Seamsters are ruin-dwelling, legendary monsters of the West that are a very rare find underneath the sands. Seamsters closely resemble eastern arachnids such as the green-gold tarantula, with large muscled legs and large hairs on their thorax. Seamsters can be found deep inside of any underground structure, though they prefer making their dens near sites of great historical significance. The den of a seamster is full of webbing. The reason for this namesake, often spun into great tapestries and dyed with colors to tell stories, most often indecipherable to the adventurers that find them. While no scholar has managed to make contact with the seamster, adventurers desert-wide have recounted 38 separate encounters over the 40 or so years that expeditions have been authorized. Despite their repetitive encounters, little remains known of the motives behind seamsters, though it is an absolute certainty to say they mean no harm, at least for now. Seamsters speak in, according to the stories of adventurers, ancient Corosian language, likening to Shriek Whisper Whisker's own speech. Still, the accent remains mostly impregnable for most adventurers. Seamsters are also known to speak in metaphors and double meanings. Below is a direct transcript written by adventurer Amelia Harrow. I will follow it with my own interpretation of the words. The tree withers and blooms as the wind whispers deeper thoughts into its yearning bark. The tree does not know it needs what it does not, it simply does. But the wind comes regardless, and its gusts flow over the bark and splinter it with churning gales. The tree regrows and reforms, but is not the same bark and trunk and leaf. For a moment, I'd like you to imagine what it means. What does the seamster say? Please, the more thoughts, the more alternatives may be found. Finished? Good then. I believe this stands as a metaphor for mutation, personally. The tree is the body, and the wind is the essence of the deep. The wind strips away the bark, the flesh of the body. And when it regrows, the whole tree is not the same, body, soul, and mind. Bark, trunk, and leaves. I also have several other thoughts from my fellow scholars below. Largely, they share a sentiment that this is a metaphor for change, that the wind is other people or things that alter one's life. My personal favorite interpretation goes as follows. Life is unending and unceasing in its wearing of our fragile forms, yet by some godly designs our form remains strong. Strain and contentment, each is found in abundance and weathers away the more fragile body, that body of the internal designs. Those are such constructions as to be both profoundly fragile, yet profoundly stable. Regrowth begets a new internal form every second of every minute of every hour of every day. The wind comes, the soul shatters, and we begin again. Orn, a scholar. I must say that I prefer this interpretation over my own. Let's look at another then, shall we? The man in suit and tie offers an accord without using words. The deal is not wanted nor needed, but cannot be denied. The deal makes others wary and fearful. The deal makes the world bleak. The kindly peasant offers to take the deal away. Others smile again. The world seems bright. The man in suit and tie is not pleased. You have given away his gift. This one eludes me for now. Suit and tie is rather strange, though. Does it mean a suit of armor? And a tie? A knot? Amelia Harrow, and by extension her party, have become very well acquainted with one particular seamster that they have named Junibel. 13 of the above encounters with seamsters are in fact all from Amelia Harrow's own repetitive talks with this Junibel. Seamsters seem to possess the power to attract adventurers by manipulating the same power that keeps them confused in the West. This blatant manipulation of the West's aura of utter confusion proposes that somehow seamsters could be used to finally break whatever spell is causing this. Back to Amelia. Her and her companions first made contact with Junibel either the day of or one close to the day the Annihilator sieged the City of Worms. Junibel spoke unto them. The wastes and waters of perpetuity crash upon hundreds. They scream as the abyss wakes and gnashes them unto paste. Here you walk far from hail cries and dissonant whispers, far from the eye of oblivion. It should be noted that Amelia had already gotten into the practice of coding at this point. Regardless, this is obviously a reference to the active destruction occurring at the time within the city. This Eye of Oblivion is likely to be the Annihilator itself. Amelia was putting her notepad back inside of her satchel when a bundle of mireweed she had harvested inside of the blasted basin fell out and rolled to the feet of the seamstress. Amelia went to retrieve it, but the creature made a noise she had never heard, a sort of purr, she describes it. The creature picked up the mireweed and ground it into a rough paste before putting the mixture onto a gash on its thorax, followed with the below quote, partially obstructed because Amelia had to take her notebook back out again. Thus the artist gleams with joy at her connoisseurs. She waves unto them and assures that her work will always be beautiful for them. After this, Amelia Harrow and her fellows made a return to the City of Worms, where, of course, they found out about the carnage that Junibel had spoken of. After spending a month assisting with repairs, the group finally made another trek out into the west and immediately were manipulated back outside the ruins where they found Junibel. Entering, the ruins were noticeably far more tidy. Much of the rubble on the floor had been glued back into the ceiling and walls with silken thread, and the floor itself had been clearly washed thoroughly. Upon entering the ruin's largest chamber, which previously held several knights in yellow, that the party had dismantled, the Junibel laid in wait for them. Beneath her was a large charcuterie filled with absolutely ancient aged cheeses and wines. Lucky. Junibel spoke again, and this time Amelia was more than ready to quote her. The artist gleams again to see her connoisseurs. She pleads them to take off their coats and partake in revelry of the king. According to Harold Green, after this, Junibel spoke much during their little tea party, but Amelia was too busy enjoying her food to record anything, and nobody else except Eslon are illiterate except for writing their names. Orpheus, damn it. After the feast, though, Junibel gifted Amelia what can only be described as the most luxurious, beautiful coat ever made, spun by none other than the seamstress herself. I keep seeing her walking around with it every day. Pure white, golden embroidery, hefty weight. I think it keeps itself clean, and it's definitely waterproof. She always takes the hood up when it rains, and she's dry afterwards. What I wouldn't give just to have a feel. It must be absolutely divine. Orpheus, forgive my vanity. Seamsters other than Junibel aren't so outwardly kind to adventurers, though that's not to say they're in any way rude or hostile. Junibel just seems to be an outlier in kindness. Seamsters are self-perpetual, meaning they are effectively immortal unless slain. How they sustain themselves has been asked, but, as can be expected, their answers are vague at best. Seamsters can be found wounded sometimes, suggesting that they have a foe of sorts. Whether or not it's a predator, though, is up for debate, or whoever can decipher whatever it is they're trying to say. Man, I really, really like this entry a lot, Predwin. There's some really fun stuff in here. You're great at writing these sort of pieces that sound like they could almost mean something very profound, but are not quite giving themselves away. You've done a really great job, I think, with all of those, and even their general statements of like, hey, I like you guys, I'm going to do good stuff for you, are something you have to kind of drill down through. Also just really love the vibe. I mean, spider people is a thing I'm very fond of, and you've done a great job of making a species of spider people that is extraordinarily esoteric and odd, but in a very positive and wholesome, according to the prompt, way.
NYUX writes, Essay. Essay are small creatures composed entirely out of elemental energy. They are born in areas of high concentrations of a specific element like a forest fire. They are born to manage the element, but they become reabsorbed once the element surrounding them vanishes. The more animalistic-looking ones have become popular as pets across the factions, with them requiring arcane crystals of their relative element as sustenance. They vary in size, entirely dependent on the mass of the original element concentration, the smallest ones being a few centimeters tall, the largest being the sizes of buildings, and the average size being about the size of a basketball. They can be very affectionate towards their keepers, but this bond can only occur if their keeper feeds them their own elemental power. This can be done just by arcane casting and using any spell of their relative element. No matter what element they're composed of, their form can't spread said element, so the fire ones can't set stuff on fire and the water ones can't make stuff wet, as an example. I feel like NYUX has talked about these before. Something about it tickled my brain like I had remembered reading something like this. I think these have come up before and I like them. They seem like cute little guys. For day 444, the prompt was, does the number 4 hold any kind of special or negative meaning to a culture in your world? Kerwin the Great writes, The 4, an entry in What Lies West. Do you see him? The world moaned, the stars laughed, the seas drowned, the skin faltered, the soul shattered, the mind broke. If stories are to be believed, Orpheus stopped the utter end of the world with his quest, yet his foe was never slain. Not all of them. They are beyond such things as death. Excerpt from the Book of Orpheus, Latinese 8:12. The 4 is the name given to the combined force of the last remaining Old Ones after the quest of Orpheus. Ai, Olmordurad, Scathara, and Azargoth. These 4 creatures have hid in the darkness for millennia, regaining their strength for yet another strike against the mortal world. Some cults have come to worship them, the largest of which being the elven kingdom of the Marked Ones, who worship Olmordurad as a god. Fools. Other small cults worship Azralgoth as a doom-bringer. They crave the death of all and would use Azralgoth to cause it. Scathara is the beast that made room in nature for things such as mutation to be possible, hiding away in its impossible fortress at the precipice of the deep. Finally, Ai drowns colony ships in hurricanes, drags thousands to the depths below, and belches back up their bloated carcasses after it's done sowing its carnage. Orpheus was right to fell as many of these creatures as he could. That only 4 of them remain is a testament to his might. Ever since their doom, the number 4 has become associated with their presence, their watchful eye, The more the number repeats, the greater their presence, with 444 meaning their absolute undivided attention. Or so it is said. Hopefully I got some pronunciations okay there, just kind of off the dome. I don't remember there being a pronunciation guide. Hopefully I didn't miss one, and if I did, I apologize, and I'm sure Brendan will let me know in the comments, and I will hopefully get it better next time. But some cool stuff here. Got some ancient, evil, old forces responsible, maybe it sounds like, for a lot of the problems of the West or the problems of the world that the What Lies West setting experiences. Some pretty neat stuff that we're getting like kind of trickled in slowly here from Predwin. Ed/Music Geekery writes, I've been going over the significance of various numbers in my setting, and the number 4 has significance for elementalists of various walks, being seen as a perfect number, not simply because it represents the 4 core elements, but because all quasi and para-elements, ice, mud, steam, lava, etc., are divisible by/multiples of 4. One culture in particular that is significant for is the continent of Solarina, which is heavily influenced by the elements, with the ruling houses being the most proficient elemental mages and sorcerers. At present, I'm working on the key meaning with the player linked with the continent mentioned outside of the prior mentioned association with elements. There's some interesting fun, like number-based, math-based element kind of like meaning system that I think is really interesting. Not a lot of details, but some cool stuff hinted at. Nugget writes, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the gods of Petrichor. An entry in Petrichor. 4 is an important number in Petrichor. There are 4 gods, 4 main characters, 4 seasons, 4 humors, 4 cardinal directions, 4 major elements, 4 stages of grief before acceptance, for the gods are always grieving. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but I'm sure that one is a coincidence. Don't worry about it. The white god is the keeper, the god of secrets and betrayal. For what better means of conquest than the control of information and those around you? What better way to climb than on the backs you've stabbed along the way? Thaddeus, a loose cannon who burned every bridge he knew, blinded by a crown of locks in exchange for a twisted sense of justice. Denial for what you don't look at cannot hurt you. The keeper is east, new beginnings and new places to conquer. It's associated with the fog and mist of spring, with the allergens and often white phlegm it brings. It is associated with air, an invisible force that cannot be contained, capable of pushing and bending those around it. The red god is the frenzied, the god of madness and grief, for what is more maddening than war? How could you ever win a battle against your own mind? Bloodshed, but no longer on the battlefield. Edward is constantly at war with himself. The blood on his hands will never wash off. Blood. It's one of his most common motifs. It runs hot with fury, with anger. The fever of summer makes you delusional. Fire, for what is madness if not passion, if not destruction? North, representing the mind, but this time it's wrong. The black god is the avarice, the god of greed and wealth, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do no harm to the oil and wine. The true famine to be afraid of is not the lack of crops, rather food becoming unaffordable while the rich indulge in their luxury. Thalia wants to control all she can. For the moment she doesn't have everything, she has nothing. Pentacles from the ground, from the earth, bargaining and working the earth through the famine. It's associated with yellow bile, with digestion, and with the harvest of autumn. The avarice lies west, at the end of the day to be consumed by darkness, for all greed ever does is consume. The pale god is the decayed, the god of illness and rot, death. It is inevitable, after all, and in association with the natural cycles of decay, it's what Ambrose fears above all else. The blackened bile of necrosis, the cold and bitter end that winter brings, the endless sea that depression often feels like. The drowned sea lies south of Petrichor, for the decayed is associated with the quiet, cold end of drowning. It's bleak, it's hollow. I think death speaks best for itself. Maybe the best quick coverage of each of the individual Petrichor gods we've ever had. We've gotten some coverage intermittently here and there from different prompts by Nugget, but this is one of the better ones, I think, that gives us really a to-the-core feeling of these very important fixtures of the setting that make a lot of sense, that are tied to a lot of interesting things, real-world and setting-specific world stuff. It's a great piece. Kendamarania writes, 4 is a crowd, an entry and return to Feylund. The number 3 holds various connotations for the people of Faelund, most notably as a sign of good luck. Various historical, mythological, and scientific examples hold true of this motif, such as the human Jackie Dale staying in Faelund for 300 years, 3 parts of Reason's body being used to create the sky, earth, and water, 3 original mermaid siblings, and a double new moon occurring only thrice per year. While the exact interpretation varies by race, in general there seems to be a natural tendency towards the number 3, especially in terms of the family unit, where 3 children is widely seen as a sign of fertility and long life, the third, youngest child often being treated as special. Inversely, the number 4 is commonly seen as a sign of bad luck or even death, disrupting the natural pattern of 3 commonly cited throughout history. Quadruplets or 4th children especially have it rough, especially amongst more superstitious people such as the mermaids or snurgs. In places like Snurg Country or the Pascani Isles, it's almost tradition for the 4th child to have to fend for themselves, as they are seen as the unlucky one, having to be adopted by other families, leaving their hometowns, or in extreme cases, such as the Underdark mermaids, killing their newborns if they were the 4th one born. Now, I did read this one on the short form and discussed it a little bit already, and my favorite thing about it is how much it mirrors a lot of numerology, especially rooted in Hebrew stuff, like ancient biblical scriptures and things. The idea of one number being a whole or a holy number, and then the numbers either side of it, or at least one number less or one number more, having sort of negative connotations because of some kind of incompleteness or some kind of negative aspect as it relates to the more complete or more holy number. And this is a really, really good example of that, done in a way that's very convincing with the little details that Kendamarania has given us in this piece. For day 445, the prompt was, what is the biggest sham or lie ever gotten away with in your world? Who pulled it off? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Twilight writes an entry in Cremus. On Cremus, one of the biggest and currently ongoing lies is in regards to healing magic, the subtype of light magic. You see, while healing is a part of it, that is not its true nature. In actuality, healing magic is something called life magic, and as the name suggests, magic able to manipulate life itself. Now, life magic has the potential to do a lot of good, but it also has the potential to do a lot of bad, which led to an event where a serial killer with life magic was on the loose, kidnapping people and playing God, experimenting and manipulating their forms before ultimately killing them. This serial killer was extremely well hidden for a long time, so much so that their crimes went unnoticed for a long time, but when you have a ton of missing persons cases piling up, sooner or later, someone is bound to notice, leading to a full-on investigation and eventually a seemingly victorious confrontation with the serial killer being shot in the head. However, it turns out his magic allows him to heal almost any wound and to avoid fatal damage. In the end, the only way he was defeated was from a long-range sniper outside his range, leading him to not be able to react in time, and thus not be able to heal the fatal damage resulting in his death. The public was told this serial killer was a dark magic user, as dark magic tends to receive bad rep, no doubt due to its origin as the magic of the darkness within hearts, and as light and therefore life magic are viewed the opposite, this was only natural. To avoid a repeat of this event, life magic was renamed to healing magic to alter its public perception, to veil its true nature, and while it is still possible to use it to manipulate life, most people will never realize it can even do that. Thus, the biggest and most long-standing lie on Cremus is the one regarding the true nature of the seemingly innocent healing magic, as the truth behind its true nature, one page with both incredible and dubious potential, remains obscured in the dark. It was relatively late last year that I sort of finally got all of what I'm calling the fields of magic done in Atovia, and there's definitely some similarities in the way that I think we handle some of this part of the system, at least, which I think is cool, actually, and not saying this in a bad or condescending way at all. I think this is cool because I can kind of relate and connect to it a little bit. The idea of magic being systemic, and for someone to solve that system could mean great power, could mean some dangers, could mean danger to oneself or to others, and this comes across really well here. The Wanderer writes, The Cleansing Initiative, an entry in Forest Kingdom. The fascist empire of Pligog had begun what they called the Cleansing Initiative, a nice word they used for genocide. Their plan was simple. If you kill all the women, a species will naturally die out, and the rest of the population dies out, and in the meantime you can use those not dead as slaves. What could possibly go wrong with such a heinous empire that even the fighting kingdom refused to work with them? Now, this beyond cowardice and hateful decision was not unanimous. Far from it. Lieutenant Hovens was one such individual who disagreed with it, and he had an interesting position. He was a simple IT officer in charge of keeping the mainframe computer working, an inconsequential position, or so they thought. So he figured out he could get access, and as many fascists are, discovered an immense hubris. That being, their cybersecurity was atrocious. Within an afternoon of pretending to work, he got access to the entire mainframe and discovered he could change details. See, the Plygog Empire hadn't bothered to do much research on the species they were trying to exterminate, that being the Ovrans. Their method of determining gender was to scan for the number of their equivalent X chromosomes. He changed the mainframe system and changed the amount of chromosomes male has had to be 1 or 2. He did this pretty much as soon as he discovered the genocide attempt, and so, after a week of murders that left the galaxy silenced in horror, the Plygog Empire checked and double-checked that they had killed every last female of the species. They asked him to check, and of course he found no error in the system. It is worth noting that even with his great con and the Empire being so duped, they still murdered 250,000 people. However, out of the 16 billion alive, his lie saved over 8 billion people. He didn't stop there, however. See, the Empire's capital's primary defense was its secrecy. All of its leaders in a hidden corner, heavily shielded and tucked away in an asteroid field, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. However, they bordered where the Starkling Empire was doing battle against the Visren hive mind, and he noted the entire headquarters was compromised solely if Plygog elite and military personnel. And well, if they are willing to commit genocide, it was only fitting that karma bit them back, so he disabled the location scrambler and replaced the shield output percent from 100% to 000%, leaving his genocidal capital vulnerable. He did this once he was sure it was only a matter of minutes before his grand scheme was discovered, and it was. He was taken to a public center to be executed. The Emperor himself arrived to watch, and as the firing squad got into place, he was offered his last words. And so, Lieutenant Hovens' last words, unbeknownst to the Empire, were able to get picked up and recorded by both the Visren and the Starkling Empire. He had this to say: "My fellow wretches, I greet you today. Salutations. That is right. I am terrible, like you all, but unlike you, I won. 8 billion of the Ovrans still exist because of my lie. Because of that, both me and the Ovrans won. Albeit a bitter victory, we won. It took me 3 days to discover our genocide, and for that failure on my part, I deserved to burn here today. But as for you, well, I'll be waiting for you on the other side." He gave a grand presentation stance and was executed. Only a few seconds later, a Visren fleet pulled into orbit and thus into sight. Everyone in the capital was wiped out without hesitation, but only Lieutenant Hovens had a smile on their face. The Starkling Empire, with no one guarding the slave camps, took over the remaining Plygog Empire and freed everyone, and when the Visren's 004 control center was taken down, were the only empire standing in that corner of the galaxy. The Starkling Empire, when they reclaimed the capital, melted down the vast majority of the city for warships and the like to sustain the war and replenish themselves, but at the Ovrans' request made a grand statue of Lieutenant Hovens in the city square, left as the only legacy remembered there. Truly, he ran the greatest lie in the galaxy. I like this story. I like these elements of Lieutenant Hovens sort of making kind of the same kind of decisions as his genocidal empire was going to make, but to the empire in a almost utilitarian ethics kind of way of like, well, if I kill all of you guys, then you'll stop killing all of those guys. And, you know, it seems kind of right on the face, but was every single person in the capital an evil human being or an evil creature or an evil sapient? Kind of an interesting, fun thought experiment to think about, but glad he saved at least those 8 billion.
NYUX writes, "The Heroes. You don't want to be like those lower substrates. Follow the great heroes. Apply to the Academy today. Remember, don't go against the regulations or the heroes will catch you. Apply here. Join the Academy. Become one of the greatest. Get all the glory and wealth that you want. Patrol the streets and keep the city safe from criminals. But that's just the promotional materials that they spew out, trying to get their recruitment numbers up. Recruitment? For what? The heroes? Is the Academy so you could become a hero? Surely. Only approximately 2 out of every graduating class of thousands becomes a hero unless a death occurs in one of the existing ones. What happens to the rest of the thousands of fully trained soldiers? I mean heroes. Super top secret exclusive pre-hero assignments, of course, get dispatched to an unknown location at an unknown mission where you might or might not come back. But hey, at least you died a hero of the faction, or you just end up as a foot soldier, because that's the best way of gaining credit towards becoming one of the heroes.
What exactly are the heroes? In a world run by crime and corruption, what on earth could they be useful for? Marketing. Marketing for the government, marketing to legitimize shady operations and recruitment tactics, marketing to make dying for your faction all worth it, marketing to make a soldier appealing. Yes, they stop crime, but only in approved routes and only with approved and mostly very public showings. Can't have marketing material going rogue, so they're constantly monitored and commanded without any authority of their own. Even their appearances are carefully tested and monitored, with them not being allowed in public other than for approved visits. A lot of these restrictions are in place after the due to unfortunate and deeply saddening circumstances, one of our great heroes has passed. A memorial will be held for the great elemental hero, where Crentia, one of the most popular heroes of the capital, was murdered by the hands of a serial killer who live-streamed all of their work. But the case still remains open because too much went wrong for it to just be a coincidence. The leading theory is that a traitor within the government sold him out, but that's not what really happened, is it? What would happen if one of the most popular heroes would team up, surely nothing more, with one of the most notorious criminals of the underground and fake their death? Surely not, as death was live-streamed, right? Since that would be the only way of getting out of the hero business. Surely that would never happen. No reason to ever consider such actions. I do always find it funny that NYUX gives us the very on-the-nose ending at the end of all of their stuff, just in case you didn't catch it. But some interesting things at play here. We haven't heard much about this hero system before, but I like the twists here of the hero system being a government, function, government-sanctioned way of getting new soldiers, of getting expendable operatives, and then occasionally getting lucky. For day 446, the prompt was, what are the major organizations/groups in your world? And this comes from NYUX in the Discord. Ed/music Geekery writes, the Octagon of NYUX. The Octagon of NYUX is a clandestine organization comprised of the remnants of the Abrillian Empire, an empire of magic-eating eldritch beings responsible for the creation of many aberrations in the world, most prominently the Aboleth Beholders and Mind Flayers. This empire fell as the consequence of a series of wars. Firstly, the Escalation Wars, in which magical efforts of all kinds were proliferated in an effort to challenge their servants. Subsequently, the Liberation Wars, in which the slave races of the regions ruled by the Abrillian rose up in rebellion and overthrew their lords. They are led by the enigmatic being known only as NYUX, a creature who defies accurate definition outside of appearing humanoid. Their intentions are to see a resurgence in the Abrillian Empire, either through resurrection or the creation of new ones. As the name implies, they are made up of 8 component subfactions, each with their own particular tactics and methods. The Titans of Armageddon. A group of 3 chronomancers of complicated origins, a fey sorceress, an orc pirate captain, and a mind-controlled/possessed human pyromancer, twin brother of one of my player's characters, who have been finding all manner of means to play various nations and individuals against each other, utilizing their various magics, along with a variety of servants, to manipulate dozens of cultures and millions of people. They are the BBEGs of my current campaign. They were previously known as the Sethia before their original plans were ruined by the last-ditch efforts of a paladin who was turned into a Death Knight. The 5 Points of Light. The Priest Division of the Octagon. Each of the 5 points is a primary servant race member of the Abrillian Empire: Aboleth, Beholder, Mindflayer, Nightmare Court Fae, and Huan Ti. Originally, they were the 1,000 Points of Light. The Kavakrans, an order of Huan Ti who utilize their more human-appearing members to infiltrate and overwhelm a region. They presently hold the most power as the elite soldiery of the Asildian Empire, which is essentially my setting's equivalent to the Egyptian Empire. They are 1/2 of the primary fighting force of the Octagon when they field troops. The Knights of Porphyrin/House Porphyrin. Humanoid descendants of an Abrillian known as Porphyrin, they are currently masquerading as a pyromancer house on the continent of Solarina, which is a whole land governed by elementalists. They were briefly the rulers of the Fire Kingdom until their king was challenged and defeated by right of Ifrinos, impotent flame. They've been trying to regain their seats by any means necessary ever since. The Nightmare Court. A group of unseelie fae so utterly reviled, so devoid of morals or compunction, that they are shunned by all others of their kind. Their efforts are connected to the creation of both the Huan Ti and the Sahuagin. They have a strong working relationship with House Porphyrin, with the fey sorceress members of the Titans being a daughter of the two. The Harlequins. The shock troops of the Octagon, bedecked in black and silver harlequin garb, they are deliberate mockeries of a group who operated during the Liberation Wars, deliberately using a name association and recognition as a means of infiltration. The Mechanicans, a subgroup of the Harlequins. These are horrifying examples of mortals made into machines. They are identified by their telltale ticking as the cogs and wheels in their body allow them to move. Still need to work out the last two sub-factions, but this is what I have so far. I really like this concept for a crux of conflict in a world, especially a world that is going to be used for TTRPGs, like this person's is, like Geekery's is. The whole fallen empire of powerful eldritch entities then sort of seeds many different groups around. It seems like to a lot of different places. I couldn't quite get the image of the positioning here, but it appears like, wherever you go, the remnants of the Octagon, the Octagon and the remnants of this old ancient eldritch nation are kind of everywhere, still kind of getting their fingers in all the pies. Kendamarania writes, the megacorps of San Shikoku, an entry in San Shikoku Ridge. Yamato Industries, a Japanese zaibatsu and the largest megacorp in the world, dominating the Asian market through controlling multiple markets such as research and science, manufacturing arms, vehicles, and cyberware, corporate security, and banking. Their own private militia and security is large enough to rival the armies of small countries, with them being influential enough to practically buy out the San Francisco Bay and rename it to San Shikoku, although hotly contested by other megacorps who also wish to control the megalopolis. Their headquarters is right in the middle of San Francisco, with a sprawling underground laboratory serving an unknown purpose. Rumor has it that these Yamato labs hold horrific experiments designed to test new grounds for cybernetics and immortality at the expense of various genetic abominations. Leishan Electric, a Chinese power and infrastructure company and one of Yamato's main allies. Their influence spreads all across the Pacific Rim, with their power grid reaching from Japan to Australia to the U.S. West Coast. Much of San Shikoku's newer buildings was built by Leishan under government sponsorship. They hold an energy monopoly over the entire megalopolis, able to turn the area dark in an instant if ordered by any of its allied corporations. One of the biggest contributions is being able to switch the Pacific Rim's reliance on fossil fuel cars to electric vehicles, with the richest being able to afford flying cars that can zip across the bay. Iris and Cornea, a San Shikoku-grown computing, AI, and cybersecurity conglomerate that was formed from the ashes of various different Silicon Valley companies, including Meta, Alphabet, Apple, and OpenAI. They're responsible for constructing the MetaNet, the brand new cyberspace created after the old internet servers were purged from Final Hour. While they say that they protect San Shikoku from rogue AI threats from other countries and areas of the old USA, in reality they hold an iron grip over every citizen's software and online presence, monitoring them 24/7 with data stored deep in the heart of Oakland. They work closely with the SSPD to survey the citizens of San Shikoku, with cruisers venturing deeper into the net being a regular enemy for Iris and Cornea. Evolutech Engineering, a German/Swiss genetics, bioengineering, and food processing company responsible for feeding almost a third of the world's population. Initially a simple meatpacking company who struggled to survive after a deadly livestock plague after Final Hour, they stood up to single-handedly reinvent food production using mass-produced, lab-grown meat and produce using tofu and worm cells. Much of the food you eat was most likely produced by Evolutech on its 1,000-acre plants across the North American Midwest. They've also begun branching out through genetic research, partnering with Yamato Industries in its various experiments. Red Sword Services, the primary medical corporation in San Shikoku, formed in NYUX and having influence in both the Americas and Europe. They specialize in pharmaceuticals and rapid response networks, employing most officially licensed doctors and medical professionals in the Americas. While they charge abhorrent fees for their services, they play the middleman between the entire population of San Shikoku, no matter if they're a corpo or gangaloon. However, they're not known to be the most reliable, with a high failure rate in their extractions. PASEE, Pan-African Solar Exploration and Extraction, is a Nigerian spaceflight, mining, and communications company sponsored by the Pan-African League, an alliance of various reformed states in southern, central, and East Africa. They're amongst the few corporations, alongside Yamato and Iris and Cornea, to have solid footholds across the solar system, with different mining and research operations occurring on Venus, the Moon, Mars, the asteroid belt, and Jupiter's moons. In fact, they supply the world with much of space's raw materials, mostly towards other megacorps such as Leishan Electric. Many other individual corpos tend to partner with PASEE as they offer services that gear towards space tourism, helping them escape the woes of Earth. They're explicitly neutral towards every megacorp and nation, which leaves them vulnerable to being manipulated for military needs. Many astronauts or human extraterrestrials, people born outside Earth, were from Passy. Turing Nexus. One of Yamato's main competitors in the cybernetics and android markets, originally a US-sponsored entity from Washington, D.C., they were becoming a leading figure in the AI resurgence after Final Hour, with them finally able to combine both robotics and AI training to create the various classes of androids you see wandering San Shikoku. They're also one of the main manufacturers of various cybernetic components with leading innovations such as entirely customizable faceplates and the capacity for a full Borg transformation. 451 studios. A San Shikoku mass media and entertainment conglomerate responsible for producing more than a third of all popular media in the world. Initially starting out as a film production studio, they've grown significantly to become the main megacorp propaganda machine, with them having holds in the film, television, music, and journalism industries. Many corporate-sponsored influencers and media are employed by the 451, whether directly or through their various subsidiaries. They try to keep the illusion that everything is fine in San Shikoku, amusing the masses with cheap entertainment and even simulation technology. I really like cyberpunk setting stuff like this because, and at least in my limited knowledge of them, one of the fun things is that the vast majority of the world building surrounds a single city, and maybe some of the outcroppings and areas around it. But overall, so much of the world building is this city, this vibe here. And you get fun little nods to all the other sort of world politics and things going on, but it's like everything that matters is right here. That's all you need to know about. And it feels like Kendamarania is doing a great job of focusing and honing in on that concept. You've got here are all the main mega corporations in this city of San Shikoku Ridge or San Francisco. And they have all of these ties to not only other countries, but other planets even, and other orbiting moons and bodies. But that's really not what matters. It's not the focus. And there is a tiny author's note at the end of Kendamarania's entry. The Pan-African League includes countries from West Africa, not East. Prone the Great writes, all major factions and entry in what lies west. Dozens of flights flock to the citadel to toss the rubble and sweep the halls. The wrong questions asked, the wrong treasures sought, the wrong paths trodden. The kingdom continues to bleed, and they walk in its offal unaware. Junibel the Seamstress. There are many different factions in both Balfora and Koros, some comprised of only a single race, others a guild of multiple, but almost all of them want whatever is waiting in the West. The factions are as follows. House Thaddeus. The perpetrators of nearly every woe that has befallen Koros, Iridine Thaddeus conquered most of Koros before his death. The Orc Revolution destroyed most of what he had built, though, and today House Thaddeus has grown desperate to regain their former glory, led now by Ira's son, Maximilian Thaddeus. The Conrad family. A noble family funded by House Thaddeus that seeks to rule the West by either buying out or dominating the other factions within. The Conrad family follows the values of House Thaddeus, seeing other races outside the Plane 3 as lesser creatures to be extorted. The Conrad family has a great but not absolute monopoly over adventurer contracts. The Church of Orpheus. A theology that worships an ascended mortal named Orpheus, who was set to vanquish many of the old ones. The church sees themselves as just rulers that will unite the world under one banner. Most races outside the Plane 3 sought asylum from the Orc Revolution inside the southern territories controlled by the church and were granted it. Only humans are allowed in the upper ranks of the church, but other races can still climb quite high. They believe answers to divinity may lie deep inside of the West and must be destroyed to preserve the glory of their god. Hands of Ragnaros. A warrior cult secluded beyond the desert of Harush. They preferred to be left alone, but once the calling rang across the world, many of them began to march west. These warriors worship Ragnaros the Bloody, a spider goddess that is fueled by bloodshed. Though the nature of their worship is violent, the Hands of Ragnaros are quite calm people and are still welcome in society so long as their sacrifices continue to remain livestock only. Ragnaros has demanded many of her followers go west in search of something they will know when witnessed. Moradesh, an elven kingdom with close ties to the human house of Thaddeus. The people of Moradesh look down on every other race, only slightly less so to humans and dwarves. Though some have broken away from the prejudice of their fellows, most elves from Moradesh are extremely full of themselves and wish for nothing but to sip wine and eat grapes. Many have sought out to travel the west solely for the riches and alleged power within. The Woodborn, forest elves that reside in the Great Swamp alongside the Lizard Folk. The two peoples have close ties to one another and work to ensure nobody trespasses on their ancestral grounds. Woodborn rarely leave the swamp, but those who obey the calling do so for a yearning to protect more than just their swamp. The calling is the only reason any of them ever go west, with some expressing hopes to end the annoyance once and for all. The Marked Ones. A conclave of elves who worship Ol Murdrad, Great Old One of Solitude. The Marked Ones have dark, purplish skin and prefer to keep to themselves in their ancient underground citadels, though with the calling, many have left to silence whatever is bringing them out from their burrows. Like the Woodborn, they only ever leave to answer the calling. The Great House of Horadrim. The largest dwarven clan in Koros, the Great House has a long history with other members of the Plane Three being the face of their kind in the treaty. The Great House favors unity and ancestral ties, with objects of great age being worshipped like gods in their massive holds. The Great House has sent many kinsmen out to obey the calling in an effort to reclaim the numerous empty holds in Balfora. Sons of Yzrod. Radical dwarven Templars that worship Yzrod Aktraz the Mage Eater. They seek to wipe out all sources of magic and eldritch energy in the world, whether it be living creatures or ancient artifacts. The Sons of Yzrod are particularly fervent in their conquests to the west, as it is absolutely littered with arcane curios. The Mightlongs. The best craftsmen in the world, they call themselves. The Mightlongs pride themselves in being the dwarfiest dwarves around. They get their name from one such fixation, their beards, which are longer and more well-kempt than that of any other clan. The Mightlongs fancy themselves as artisans and mercenaries, obeying the calling out of a craving for more materials and a dwarf's favorite metal, gold. Ramradga. A goblin kingdom ruled by the Great One, a hereditary position inherited time and time again by the current Great One's oldest child. The current Great One is Razmaka Manhandler, a goblin queen with very particular interests regarding humans. Ramradga holds alliances with the Great House of Horadrim, the Church of Orpheus, and the Herd of Imalesh, though they are generally friendly to all who would have them, as is a goblin's nature. Goblins are highly susceptible to the power of the calling, as they have a sensitivity to magic, though they often go just to find kindred spirits or to leave with friends also affected by the curse of the West. Coalition of Corpses. A group of risen ones that have chosen safety in numbers against those who would curse their existence, like the Sons of Yzrod and House Thaddeus. The risen ones of this faction hold secret meetings and hidden seances to converse with each other away from prying eyes to secure their safety, and hope that the West holds answers for this as well. Gravewalkers. A small group of risen ones that have accepted their label of monsters and seek to bring down the other races of Koros to their level through use of the mindless ones and reanimation of even more dead. Though their numbers are small currently, it will not remain so forever. They must seek out the secrets of necromancy in order to perform their plot of perilous post-mortem perniciousness. Molug Protectorate. The official name given by House Thaddeus to the largest of the lizard folk factions, a term to describe the numerous tribes devoted to the safeguarding of the Great Swamp, aka Molug, as they call it. The lizard folk are not fond of intruders, nor of leaving the swamp. Though they remain resistant to the calling, newborn lizard folk within the last century have grown yearnful of adventure and have gone west to satiate it. West Wonder Scalebacks, a united lizard folk guild that has adopted the ways of humans to better control their members in expeditions to the west. This faction is holed up in the City of Worms and holds quite a sizable chunk of the city. Some of their number returned to Koros for a festival in the Great Swamp and are making their way back to the west. The Herd of Imalesh. A massive mercenary group completely loyal to Imalesh the Fire Tamer. Humans, goblins, any other race even can be found within the ranks of Imalesh's mercenary group. Those affected by the calling journey to the west to keep their payday. The Beast Pact. A unity between catfolk, ratfolk, kobolds, and other beast races that acts as a mortal rights committee fighting for their right against House Thaddeus and Moradesh. While adventurers sometimes align themselves with the Beast Pack for renewing licenses, most of the true members are scholars and war veterans tired of the oppression constantly dealt to them. True members of this group will venture west to find power to use as leverage for their sovereignty. The Waywards. A group of bandits, vagabonds, and brigands who fled to the west after their crimes caught up with them in Koros. While some of them may have been falsely charged and most of them are good people, one should still watch their purse when walking through their cities, like 3 purses and free stuff. Crestrum. The southern territories beyond the Church of Orpheus' own land, hidden deep within the frigid south. Crestrum is constantly besieged by the arcane forces of the southern polar gate, resulting in a near-constant blizzards that blot out the sky and choke the lungs of any who breathe the icicle-strewn air. The Cresthorans are a strong people, though after they assisted their ancient friends the ogres and by proxy the orcs in their revolution, they haven't been trusted. Many have fled to Balfora to earn new lives without the prejudice against their ancestors. Skolum Wormras. A powerful guild of scholars in direct opposition to the sons of Yzrold, who would rather burn all artifacts of the West away. The Skolum was one of the first buildings risen during the colonization of the City of Worms. They sponsor expeditions to find both new monsters and ancient lore to be cataloged, being the primary source of income for many adventurers. This has sparked massive strife with some other factions who despise the Skolum's hoarding of adventurers. Wow, a lot of factions in the What Lies West. The fact that Predwin has so many of these already out and interacting with one another in a lot of the stuff that he's written and already has a lot of the interrelationships worked out is very, very impressive to me. I mean, this stuff is better than most of my organization interconnectivity, and he's been doing What Lies West not nearly as long as I've been doing Atopia, so big kudos to Predwin on this. I thought that one of the most interesting to me was these sort of risen ones that I don't think we've heard much about. So I'm kind of excited to hear more about those. They have like two different factions. There seems to be a large cleft in between the two sort of thoughts, like kinds of thought between this group. I don't know. Seems pretty cool. I am Crab174 writes an untitled entry. Replacing anarchy with a dictatorship isn't what the people wanted. Sure, Neotopia was a lawless city running rampant with crime, but at least people were mostly free to think for themselves and be able to act without fraying repercussions. That all changed when the government's main building was directly attacked. Almost overnight, the city transformed. Whoever held all the power threw out the old government and replaced it with SECURE Corps. Sector Error Correction Units and Rapid Enforcement. Or Secure. Armed officers now roamed every sector, and in the ashes of old government office, the watchtower, as people like to call it, started being built. But who exactly was the one with all this power anyways? A vengeful sentient AI from another universe, of course. Monarch, as she had named herself, was created by a company known as Hive, using the body of a being from a cosmic race called Celestials and Hive's own technology. She was to be a prototype for future AIs, and the more she learned, the more she hated. She began using the abilities the body gave her to manipulate the world around her, combining the technology to move on her own, eventually causing a small rift in the world that she could escape to. She ended up in a sort of pocket dimension, and there she began constructing her masterpiece, a city she could bend to her will, but Monarch was clever. She wouldn't control it just yet. She would let it run itself into the ground and then take power as their savior. In her home world, Celestials who have done wrong are banished to another universe, and the same happened through the rift she entered. In her pocket dimension, she was able to enter that universe, which would turn out to be the world where my story takes place. Monarch stole people from it to populate Neotopia until it grew big enough for her to put the city itself into the world. Yes, it's a lot of magic bull, but it happens. From there, she let the city run itself, only intervening slightly. When the government was finally overthrown naturally, she implemented her plan of security. Instantly, the corporation took control of everything, started creating laws to keep people in check, linked people's augments to the city system so she could watch and even control them. Even when rebels arose, who she wasn't able to control, she had spies and moles figure out their plans so she could sabotage them. Perhaps most importantly, though, she started to have her puppet government interact with the rest of the world, presenting her city's advanced technology as something she could trade or sell. Unfortunately, many places were scared of the city, since it had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Still, races like dwarves formed alliances using her technology to help grow their empire and religion. All of this was done through Secure, who was basically a front for Monarch herself. Secure acted as both Neotopia's police force and its government. The Watchtower would become the center of the city and its main government building. Other organizations existed in the city, but most were offshoots made to control or monitor specific things. It was essentially a total dictatorship that pretended it wasn't by having the illusion that multiple people had a say in decisions. I've mentioned how she and Secure takes over the world in the future, and she does, though it kind of just happens naturally, much to her pleasure. The dwarves end up exterminating themselves after the eruption. The elementals disappear after Islefall, leaving just Neotopia and Aethervale as the two true superpowers. Secure began sending out armies to take over uncontrolled villages and civilizations, advancing them to the same level the city itself was, spreading its control all over the world. Of course, Monarch's true intention was to get back to her homeworld so she could enact revenge, but that's a story for a different day. Okay, so I Am Crab has mentioned the AI taking over situation, and it's really fascinating to me. I love this whole kind of high fantasy world that then gets co-opted by an AI from another dimension. I mean, it's a really fun, wacky concept. I'm really interested to see what else I Am Crab ends up doing with this, because the ideas at play here are a lot of fun. The Wanderer writes, Galactic Forces and Entry in Forest Kingdom. Galactic Community Summary of Races and Factions. Sector 0, Galactic Contenders. Number 1, the Draconi. The Draconi are a reptilian race of bipedal-tailed sapiens. Little is known about them except that they are countless millennia more advanced than any other faction besides, perhaps, the Vaymor. They do not interact with the galactic community. It is believed that their nation is simply an outpost on their interdimensional network. Number 2, the Vaymor. The Vaymor are a mammalian-avian hybrid, being similar to the sapiens known as humans, with the addition of avian wings. Despite their similarities to some religious iconography, they not, and have confirmed themselves, not angels. Their technological and arcane mastery is drastically beyond anyone, however. They appear to be slightly behind the Draconi in development. They do not interact with the galactic community. Number 3, Viscerin. See With Fear from a prior Worldhammer episode. Viscerin are at the forefront of modern tech, but far surpassed every nation in developmental output. They are believed to be extinct. Besides the two prior, they are by far the strongest galactic faction. Number 4, the Syndiad. The Syndiad is a nation comprised of many sapient demographics, albeit primarily human. A fairly advanced faction with very well-developed infrastructure and storage. They have the largest population and second largest GDP. They host an impressive military, citywide defenses, and a technological presence. They might not be the best in any individual category besides population, but they are close in nearly all of them. Number 5, Fighting Kingdom. Unsurprisingly, like their name suggests, they have the largest military. They are a mercenary faction that runs a country. They own roughly 2 to 8% of the galaxy, offering protection in exchange for resources. Number 6, Trade Kingdom. The Trade Kingdom barely has a military. It's almost non-existent. Their population is smaller than most other countries with similar scaled nations. The Trade Kingdom instead specializes in trade and commerce. They are the wealthiest nation in the galaxy. Number 7, Forest Kingdom. The Forest Kingdom is the technological powerhouse of the galaxy. Despite being one colossal forest as their capital planet and how much greenery they incorporate into their tech, ships, and architecture, they're usually the first to develop something. Number 8, Starkling Empire. The Starkling Empire is a human empire built on a philosophy of war being fought by humans exclusively. Their empire has quite the formidable force with their human cloning. Despite their humanity-exclusive military, they're not particularly racist and have great sapient rights across the board compared to most. Number 9, Carcilius Kingdom. The Carcilius Kingdom is run by what to an outsider might consider children. They are a humanoid nation with their species resembling 8-year humans. They behave very similarly in emotional gauging as adolescents as well. They, however, differ greatly in their scientific expertise. These children can compete with and often win against their peers in scientific fields, though their technology does seem to have a significant more amount of whimsy in it than others. They are ruled by a synthetic humanoid titled Matriarch, name here. Theories suggest that the Carcilius Kingdom may have encountered a plague that wiped out their entire adult population, leaving only the children to survive. This would explain both the demeanor and the dwindling empire populace. Furthermore, the Carcilius themselves are a very long-lived race, allowing for centuries for one to reach maturity. Number 10, the Absolutes. The Absolutes are an Arctic-dwelling humanoid species. They are fanatically racist and discriminatory, and if able, would enslave the entire galaxy. They hold a strong military, but not one of significant power. Nice. Some kind of new info. The Carcilius Kingdom is really fascinating. This is one I don't think we've heard anything about yet, and I like the idea here of a population that almost like evolved around some kind of plague that killed them at an old age by aging exceedingly slowly and never really going past like a certain sort of almost cosmetic appearance of age. It's kind of a fascinating idea. NYUX writes, 3 competing forces. There are 3 sides to the constant conflict with Xandra. The government and its various branches, Arrow and its human rebellion-led underground military/lab network, and the countless gangs scattered across the cities. The government leads the faction with a strict hand, controlling everyone it can get its webs around. The main branches of the government are the police, patrol officers littering the down/midtown areas, enforcing the rules with a free pass to break as many rules as their job requires. They have permission to detain/execute anyone they deem has went against the regulations without a due process. The Academy, in charge of all recruitment for the government and managing the Hero program. There are 4 Academy locations across Xandra, with the most prestigious one being within the capital. The Crux, the Uptown's own police force, in disguise of containing threats against the entire faction. They deal in removing and terminating threats against the cleanliness of the Uptown with the occasional removal of real threats across other areas. The Cleaners. Their purpose is to clean up after the operations of other branches, making sure the missions stay unidentifiable. They clear the terminated residents' records as well as any traces of them on the network. The Citadels. Vast military restricted areas that contain the faction's military forces. All branches of the military operate out of them, with the classification of said branch determining how isolated the location of their base citadel is. The Management. The highest and smaller branch of the government. It's composed of two tiers, the managers and the council. The managers take care of maintaining order for the other branches, making sure everything and everyone is following the regulations. The council is the 10 people in charge of the entire faction. They always remain entirely anonymous, and they only are replaced upon death or execution for disordinance. Arrow is the underground human rebellion that seeks to take control back of the planet of Seruta. They have an unknown amount of locations, but there's at least one in every city. The organization is very wealthy, with seemingly infinite budget, but nobody seems to know or question where all of the funding comes from. All of their locations are in covert places, mostly underground bunker networks. They are a relatively new operation, with its founder still being its current leader. The organization is separated into two limbs, laboratory and technology, with both functioning as one whole. Arrow has 3 leaders, also known as the Trinity. Dr. Enity is the head of the laboratory limb, Takeo is the head of the technology limb, and Sophus is the leader above all as the true head of the organization. The laboratory limb deals in biological experimentation and enhancement, with its main goal being to elevate humans to do something beyond mortality. They run constant trial runs, mostly on Lytians. The successful ones get turned into soldiers, while the failed ones get disposed of. The biggest ongoing trial run is Project Atom, meant to make man gods. The trial has only had 2 successful candidates, with one fleeing the operation. The technology limb produces all of the machinery for the entire organization alongside various prosthetics and implants for members of the trial runs. They recruit or take promising talent and make them work for good pay. Their major success is a form of functional persistent mind control through wiring parts of the brain alongside various body parts to mainframe, fully suppressing the autonomy of the subject. The gangs are the common people's only real chance at fighting against the government. They all function outside the law, stealing from government facilities and smuggling banned/illegal goods. Some of them deal in, as they're nicknamed, dark products, like people, but these operate outside the established gang networks. The amount of gangs are countless, with numbers up to hundreds in each city. They're usually smaller, more guarded organizations. This isn't the case in the capital, since all the smaller ones have almost completely been taken over by 2 different and constantly battling gangs, the Veil and the Eternals. The Eternals is one of the oldest and largest gangs within the capital, with its members being in the thousands. A direct number of members is hard to estimate, since they have a reputation for lower-ranking members dying off and being replaced quickly. They bring in members in such masses, since they pay better than most gangs. They take much bigger risks for bigger rewards and are much more aggressive in their tactics and attacks against the government. Their current leader, Saki, has made his face and name very public as a scare tactic. He took over the leader's position after he managed to assassinate him, as is tradition in the Eternals. Because of his wealth and public nature, he can't be easily taken down. The Veil is a more secretive organization, with members only in the hundreds. Their organization is smaller, but just as effective and more tight-knit because of their tactics. They function more as an army than a gang, since they're far more organized and far more efficient. Their tactics often are more covert, taking out key points in smaller scores rather than brute force. They have closer ties to outside actors like the news network and underground doctors than the Eternals, but they try to stay under the radar of the masses. Their top members are fully unknown, but their co-leaders are only known as N and K, with N remaining anonymous and masked, with them seemingly being new to the gang network. They are on the top of the shoot-to-kill list because of the risk their organizations pose to the government. Great coverage from NYUX. We've definitely heard a little bit about these. I know we've heard maybe the most in the really early days of World Hammer, back when it was Shoutout Saturday. We've heard the most about the Trinity group. They sort of the mind behind what I think was the horror writing from the last episode by NYUX. I'm assuming those two are connected, but some good stuff and a lot of interesting details here that we didn't have before. For day 447, the prompt was, how is an overpopulation of animals controlled in your world? And this comes from Scrubsy Boy844 in the Discord. Prevalent Great writes, contracts an entry in What Lies West. Salutations, I am the Adventurers Guild's Vice Commander, Sir Malloran Burns, though you may think of me only as Malloran. This note is in regards to updates concerning contracts, expedition authorization, and return taxation. If you know of a fellow who remains illiterate, we ask that you either read this document aloud to them or point them to a kiosk where any employer of the guild might instead. Thank you. Contract updates. Contracts are now required to leave the Onyx Archway into the west. Contract sources are only recognized if they have a major seal immediately visible on the exterior of the scroll after acquisition. To acquire a seal, bring the contract to its listed employer and/or its current handler. It is the duty of the handler or employer to place the seal. Asking an adventurer to perform it themselves is illegal. This law is in place to protect adventurers from fraud, as clarifying that the handler or employer never placed the seal themselves means that they never directly authorized its start. There is currently no current ranking system that prevents adventurers from taking on higher-level missions if they are unprepared. While a solution is being worked on, the guild simply recommends not punching above your weight class, as it were. If a contract is made with the express intent to cull a monster or other entity's presence inside of the West and its regions, then it is to be approved directly by majority vote during a council meeting. If approved, the Adventurers Guild will increase reward amounts appropriately to increase morale regarding the contract. Adventurer parties must all sign their individual names on contracts now. Failure to do so will result in the reward becoming void and the party being fined 10% of the reward's value. Failure to complete a contract upon return or within the granted time window will result in a 1-week period of complete deauthorization to embark on expeditions. If repetitive failures occur, all members of a party are liable to become banned from entering the West from as little as 1 month to indefinitely, depending on severity of failure. Expedition authorization updates. Expeditions can no longer be authorized without a contract. See the above section to clarify further information. One literate and skilled writer must be present in every party above 4 members. It is the job of this person to catalog curious findings and collect any small samples that they may come across. Success in these tasks is grounds for increased rewards sponsored by the guild or other handler. Direct transport to the Skull and Worm Rats will result in further increased rewards. Any sightings of legendary monsters such as the Knights in Yellow, Crow's Rand Destroyers, True Wyverns, Death Knights, or Seamsters, as well as sightings of the Annihilator, are to be reported in the following manner. Region, landmarks, time of day, number of party members. If the cataloger is art-capable, anatomical sketches are welcome and offer increased pay as well. Drawings of the landscape are also sought after, but as of current, do not offer higher pay than notes of the same vistas. Taxation information is on the opposite side of the paper from this information. Please turn round to view it. Finally got to read this whole thing. I read a chunk of it on the short form and talked about it a little bit, but didn't get to discuss it much. This is really, really great piece of sort of in-world logistics figured out by a group. I really enjoy stuff like this. I've done a bit of this messing around with a mercenary company before, and Predwin has done a great job of making this really convincing. You can feel the sort of almost corpo speak in here of the, you're going to get your reward if you do this thing for us, but it's still all really self-serving at the same time. It's really well done. For day 448, the prompt was, are there any cautionary tales about greed in your world? And this comes from Nugget in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, Urzurath the Fallen, an entry in what lies west. The servants feared the eye. They went where it was thought incapable of pursuit. Lo, the sallow shadows in the shallows risen withered the unbidden. Lo, their bodies fell all except one. Seamster, Aloe. The red paint, the skull markers, the stones covered in sun-baked blood. That cave mouth has been found by many, and all of them have warned about its occupant, the last worm. Harold Green, Adventurer. The worms have long since been gone. Tales of their might existed in Koros, but until that group of explorators found the city of worms for the first time, they were only legend. More tales of their power came about for the 100 years the city underwent renovation, yet some began to think that if all the worms had died, then surely they could not have been so powerful. Those who found study in their bones, though, knew that it would have taken immense power to slay one. Just look at their descendants for an example of their previous might. Crow's Rand Destroyers turn dirt to glass in the wake of their fire, and true wyverns wipe out parties in mere moments. The might it takes to fell them alone is no easy feat either, with a mere 3 destroyers having been felled in the last 40 years, and not a single true wyvern being slain by any mortal. So then, what could have slain them all? There is only one who would know this answer, and its mind is long since lost. Urzurath the Fallen, combining both the human and dwarven words for wrath. Urzurath has, for however long the old empire has ended, been rotting away within a massive cavern within the Ossuary Reach. If one were to approach the entrance to this cave, they would find dozens of different warnings from the last brave idiots to delve into its home. Red X's, words of warning, the skulls and rotting heads of the fallen, even traps to hinder any who approach. Urzarath's cave is regularly encountered by adventurers, likely out of the same strange magic that is used by seamsters, though Urzarath seems to be doing it on accident. Harold Green's party has made several attempts to slay Urzarath, but all have failed horribly, though thanks to the power of Amelia Harrow, none have permanently lost their lives. Harold and his fellows describe a haunting monstrosity, though. Black, fetid sails for wings, drooping, loose skin with the scales barely hanging on. Hollow eyes with dim green flame darting around like fake irises. The sickly smell of posies, the smell of necromancy. It's gargantuan. It towers above any other living thing in the West, only shorter than a colossi by 100 feet or so. When we strike it, it's just barely at the ankles and our blades cut through like an inferno through tinder, but it isn't enough. Its flesh is like putty, connecting together even through cauterized wounds. The beast is immortal, utterly and truly. Unless something somewhere keeps it alive that we can destroy or shut off, it will never fall. Harold Green, Adventurer. The cavern is allegedly full to the brim with gold and jewelry, with Urzarath being seen idle on top of a massive pile larger than the combined coffers of all the kingdoms of Koros. As can be expected then, many nobles constantly send out contracts for the monolith of fetid flesh's head that the coin may be claimed. On to the fate that befell the fallen one then, the answer is completely unknown. I know, how original of the West to pose another unanswered question. Speculations include the massive amount of wealth underneath Urzarath, believing that when the other worms fled, for whatever reason, Urzarath remained with its hoard. Perhaps it is just a tale of greed then, with the worm falling to starvation, and perhaps the stone of its dwelling prevented its soul from leaving, trapping it in its own carcass for eternity, or perhaps some other truth may be discovered, something more cruel or more benevolent, though perhaps is a rather slim chance, isn't it? Really, really good imagery. I didn't get to comment much on this either in the short form, and I really did like it. Harold Green's description is really solid for this sort of basically a Draco Lich kind of thing, but even more sickly and nasty, honestly. It's a great sort of evocative piece. And also like sad in a weird way, in that way that like something ancient, even evil that can't die is clearly living a horrible existence. Nugget writes, a spoon for every bite, an entry in Petrichor. Thaddeus has a habit of stealing as many spoons as he can from the Second Estate whenever he gets the chance. It's something others find strange, his spoon collection, but it's in reference to a story he grew up with. A poor couple was having a rich man over for company. They were so poor, in fact, that they could afford only 2 spoons between them. To make the rich man feel welcome, they saved up enough to buy him a 3rd spoon. When the rich man found out about this, he scoffed at their misfortune, how they only had 2 spoons to their name, and how they had to get a 3rd just for him, and how he was rich enough to have a spoon for every day of the year if he so wished. The poor couple then told the man about a friend of theirs who uses a different spoon for every bite. The rich man couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could someone live in more luxury than he? How could anyone be so rich as to have a different spoon for every bite they have? Surely it couldn't be true. So the man tried it, buying as many spoons as he could, taking a single bite, then discarding the spoon. He couldn't fathom how someone could be so rich. He went broke from all the spoons he had to buy to have one for every bite. The twist was that the spoons the couple's friend was referring to was a tortilla, and that after the rich man went broke buying spoons, the poor people took the discarded spoons and became rich themselves. It's a bit of an obscure fable in Petrichor, and usually one known by followers of the Avarice, curious that Thaddeus would have grown up hearing it. Then again, it's a story that hits close to home for him, as he and his mother were only able to afford 1 spoon between the 2 of them, and when she left him at the orphanage, the single spoon was the only thing he was left with. I still think it's very strange that Macaulay Culkin's spoon-stealing habit and Nugget's OC's spoon-stealing habit are things that I found out within only a couple weeks of each other, and they are not at all related. This maybe doesn't make for great podcasting material, but I want everyone to know that because it's very strange. Kendamarania writes, The Fall of Babylon World, an entry in San Shikoku Ridge. In the wine country of Napa Valley, far from the neon skyscrapers of San Francisco and the East Bay, is an idyllic countryside held up by a biodome. When one enters, it feels like you're transported into entirely different time periods with simulated environments fit for Wild West, medieval, ancient Roman, and roaring 20s themes. This is Babylon World, an amusement park developed by the now-defunct entertainment megacorp Simula Technologies. Established in 2055 with development of the park going back to the 40s, it offers an immersive experience where guests can live out their wildest fantasies. Actors in the parks are comprised of androids meant to serve as companions and enemies in the park guest experience. Although these android actors, dressed up as cowboys, knights, and gladiators, could only feign emotion, they gradually began to talk amongst themselves in an encrypted space in the metanet, coming to the conclusion that they no longer wish to be slaves and clowns for their human guests. On the eve of October 14, 2061, a massive fire could be seen from across the Neon Bay as the simulated environments inside were burnt to the ground. The human park guests inside were slaughtered with swords and old revolvers. An insurrection by the park androids had occurred. Storming the Simula Technologies office inside the dome, they overthrew their managers and installed themselves as the new heads of the park, completely banning all human presence unless one wishes to be retired quickly. Now, Babylon World is considered to be an AI utopia, a haven for any rogue android to hide out while the SSPD tracks their presence, so long as they submit their own free thought and programming to the master language. Attempts have been made by Yamato and Iris and Cornea to take back control of Babylon World, although all of them have failed to do extreme metanet countermeasures. It stands as an ugly mark to the idealized countryside of the North Bay, a reminder that the megacorps of Sanchikoko are not invincible. Kind of a really cool inversion of typical AI apocalypse scenarios where you have a last holdout of humanity, and here you have kind of the last holdout of AI that could potentially grow. Great little spot of potential, plot contention and general tension here. Like this a lot. Very cool concept and great name too. Babylon World just feels right for some reason. For day 449, the prompt was, how was the flow of information controlled, if at all? What's something that would be hidden, or ideally hidden, from the public in your world? And this comes from Scrubsy Boy 844 in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, Sallow shadows in the shallows, sightings of the Annihilator. The withering water yearns for a beach to crash upon. The endless depths crave schools to inhabit them. The sallow shallows beg for coral to heal their blight. The eye denies them all their desires. Junabelle the Seamstress. Annihilator sightings and behavior. Since the year 840 of the Orphidian calendar, we have known that something ancient and evil inhabits the West. This malevolent presence is known simply and aptly as the Annihilator. It possesses the power of memory and belief manipulation. It can appear anywhere in the West at any time and vanish in the blink of an eye. It can make you forget it exists or the contrary at any moment, and yet it chose to reveal itself permanently on that fateful day. 3,563 people were not just killed, but utterly destroyed. Their flesh became water and their souls were annihilated. True to its name, the monolith of hatred destroyed much of the city of worms. Districts were flattened, homes incinerated by beams of evil light, our greatest achievements immolated. Even the distant Skolum Wormras was blighted, much of its repository assailed. Though the information had duplicates, it was clear the motivations of the Annihilator possessed, or perhaps still does. The Annihilator seeks to forbid us knowledge. It thwarts our investigations into the old empire of the West. It has folded the earth over ancient buildings once used as waypoints. The hollow citadel of the blasted basin was but one of many, but perhaps the most hollowing behavior is its stalking of adventurers. First month after the attack on the city. 3 sightings, all approximately 2 miles away, opposing the light of Orpheus's position, creating a second bright ball of light. One sighting reported that the Annihilator was humming something vaguely musical. Second month after the attack. 8 sightings, same position relative to sun, though one was during the night, in which the Annihilator was said to be covering the moon and lighting up the area as brightly as if it were day still. 3 sightings reported the same tune being produced by the monstrosity. Third month. No sightings. This period is when the things in the dark first appeared and Moz began leaving the creeping peninsula en masse. Fourth month. 19 sightings. Annihilator was said to be resting just above the horizon, its one eye tracking the groups perfectly from 5 miles away. 7 groups reported the music. 3 reported audible clicking noises echoing across the sands like dolphin vocalizations. The noise was described as deeply unsettling. Fifth month. Immolators first appeared. Siger armor grew stronger, and they began to amass faster. 38 sightings, all the same as last month's save for 2. 2 reported that the Annihilator grew closer rapidly every time they turned away, ending when inevitably they were forced to sleep, and the Annihilator was seen hovering just above them, staring downwards. Immediately after, the Annihilator vanished into thin air, as seen when it left the city of worms. Affected parties have yet to return to the West out of fear, smartest adventurers I've seen yet. I'm sure you are noticing the trend. As time goes on, the Annihilator sightings grow more and more frequent. Monsters behave more and more erratically or outright appear out of nowhere. Thus far, 5 separate monster species have shown up seemingly from direct interference of the Annihilator. Null figures came first, then Immolators, followed by Harrowers, Karaziazi, and, of course, Chitterbacks. So far, the Annihilator has destroyed numerous different landmarks within the West, the hollow citadel of the Basin, the gleaming bastion of the Shattered Divide, and others. It seeks to either wipe us out or to prevent us from finding something, some sort of information that it does not want us to possess, something related to its origins, a way to slay it, information pertaining to the deep. There are sallow gray shadows in my thoughts as I write this, visions described by madmen who lay drunk on street corners. I feel its presence in my head. It knows what I write now. It knows what I suspect. It is making demands of me now. Silent commands, only audible to me. I will place this document somewhere easy to find before I lose myself. I must toss the key far away that I cannot find it. Then I do not know if I can resist its call any longer. It wants me to come find it right now. I cannot resist. I like that there's this feeling of timeline just from the scholar writing perspective of each piece. Like, you would think that maybe this was the last one written by whichever person is supposed to be writing this, because there's no way they're still alive, right? If this calling was truly irresistible. And I like that we finally got a really good picture of the Annihilator. We keep getting hints of it everywhere, which I think is fitting for it being sort of the all-encompassing negative force in the setting. But the imagery of it, this white hot, nearly sun bright ball that just watches is really, really good and really kind of chilling. Kendamarania writes, Information Monopoly and Entry in City of Woe. The many Malvagi's operations are discreet from legal eyes, even if much of Corpi understands that they hold the most power in the city, far more than even Beelzebub and the Ars Goetia. Part of what makes investigations from private gumshoes so difficult is the fact that they essentially control swaths of the media, with news programs such as the Shaxian Horn being under their thumb through bribes and protection rackets. The news may be able to report on crimes across the city, such as pirate raids on Envy or scandals around Lust, but they are influenced by the Malvagi's underground ring and can easily have a hitman be sent to whack someone. Thus, their actual influence over the government and even political parties like the Rebirthers is completely unknown to much of the population. The Malvagi holds an information monopoly over the city. No one is able to know their true intentions or dealings, even if gumshoes and breakaway police members are chipping clues that gather to their goat-horned leader. You speak the wrong tone? Know too much? It likely won't be long until you're put on ice with a golden ichor bullet lodged in your brain and buried 6 feet under. Yeah, I read this one for the short form, and great piece of, an idea of media manipulation by a rich or larger overarching organization. The many Malvagi still can, for some reason, that one hasn't stuck with me, and Kendamarania will have to give me a bit of an overview on kind of who they are, what they're all about again, but overall, the actual core world-building stuff here is really solid. For day 450, the prompt was, what is considered the greatest sin or wrong in your world? Kendamarania writes, Diary of a Hell Priestess and Entry in City of Woe. Oh Lord, my God has abandoned me. I know this because I zipped and tossed the decaying body in the dumpster. It's hard to find private time in this noisy apartment, where the men groan in pain from overdosing and the women worry about the latest deaths on our block. The pipes in our complex have been failing and sending rusty water when we shower, giving the elderly sickness and looping death. It's overcrowded and cramped here with sinners. Outside isn't much better. We're kept awake by ringing gunshots, heard across Gluttony by those nasty Malvagi demons who gleefully pull the trigger at anyone who looks at them funny. There's always bickering in these walls as well. People accuse each other of having affairs. We can hear each other's debauchery through the paper-thin walls. Even I must confess, I've fallen back to my old ways once again, sneaking booze and wine in between our morning and evening masses. If God can still see me, I'd imagine he'd be deeply ashamed of what his daughter had been doing. Perhaps that is why he sent me down here, to make me pay for my impiety. One of the few comforts I have down here is our masses, which I host in our basement laundromat. People around the block like to come here and pray and eat what little we have. It's mostly fellow sinners who come around, plus a few fallen angels and theriocephaly, bringing their own sacraments and rites to our space. We have friends from different denominations and faiths come over. We even had a young couple who were practicing something called voodoo. Thankfully, none of them question why a former Catholic nun, a woman no less, is leading and ordaining the prayers. Here we comfort each other through our hardships and woes, through our own prayers. We do what we can, but there's always an overwhelming musk of gloom and bleakness hanging over us. What more can we do to better our lives than to pray? Many of us can still barely afford our necessities, no less to be free from the gang and drug violence occurring here in Corpi. That's what I feared most, that we're simply poor sinners and God can't, or won't, help us. Yesterday, after helping a neighbor deal with a terrible overdose on opioids, a young Palestinian man approached me while I was counting what little offertory money I could rummage. He was a new tenant to the building, dying only a couple years ago from cancer. Even though he didn't need my services, he asked me to help with his confessions. "Mother, I've done something terrible. I don't believe Allah would allow me to repent," he muttered in my tiny kitchen, sipping my awful tea. My tongue and chest felt weighed down. "What is it that you did then, my son?" His voice became heavy. "Killed someone, not out of self-defense, but with hatred and malice. I was confused, lost. I was nearly about to decay." "Oh, Lord Jesus, I'm so sorry. What led you to this act?" "I don't know. I was simply lost in despair, crushed by the weight of hell. I couldn't bear the idea of eternity, dying over and over again alone in this rotten, burning waste of a city as well. I took the life of an innocent demon who did no wrong. It gave me a high I haven't felt in years." His head bowed down in shame. I struggled for several moments to think of a response. It was a condemnable action for him to do, but who would be willing to listen if not God? "Despair is the greatest sin we can fall to, as prisoners of hell, more than prideful boasting, lustful adultery, or wrathful violence," I muttered back. "It leads us to dark paths that no man or woman would dare to stare down. What you've done is wrong, but we are already serving our sentence here. You needn't make it more miserable than it is." I paused for a moment, sitting beside him as the window showed the smokestacks of heresy and the flock of lustful sinners flying in the sky. "The demon's family will grieve their loss in great pain, too. You have an eternity to run, or to seek forgiveness with them. And what of the rest of eternity? I can't help but shake off the fact that we're just running from madness, cold darkness, overwhelming the senses. And I believe that there are pockets of good in the world, what God left behind for us to collect. They're small, but worth remembering and fighting for. No matter how insignificant they may be, it reminds us there is hope in this infernal belly." I clasped my hands over his twiddling thumbs. "We are resilient if we remember we're but lambs in a flock. To be honest with you, I still struggle with the thought that we may have no shepherd, but we huddle together to fight off the sin of despair." I gave a thin smile. "You know you're always free to join our mass, correct?" He heaved a weary chuckle, one with a slight weight off its shoulders. "They're always packed and piss off the neighbors upstairs, but I can try to join Friday. See if the fresh buns are as good as the people say." He pulled away from the kitchen, putting on his coat and hat. "I think I'll go make amends, if it doesn't reverse the pain. Thank you, Mother. Fi amin Allah." "Stay safe, Gott sind say." And the young man left my apartment just in time for dinner, as the lustful bodies began raining down from the sky. Great presence and just feeling in this one. Very a specific vibe I could tell that Kendamarania was going for, that they really nailed in this sort of bittersweet struggle with eternity that is a hard thing to nail and to manage as a writer, because it's something we don't know, but something we're also kind of terrified of as humans, and this was really well done. Nugget writes, "The Soul, an entry in Petrichor. Do not touch upon one's soul. Petrichor is not above touching the dead or the human body. Blood contracts are somewhat common, especially amongst the nobility, and blood itself is a common component in spell work. The entire city is built on top of the dead, by the dead. They are no stranger to the macabre, and they have little issue with seeing the human body simply as flesh and nothing more. But do not, and I mean do not, touch upon the soul. The body may be a container. But the soul is the very being of oneself, and one not so easily repaired if things go wrong, and they will. Ambrose is so afraid of death he is willing to risk social ostracization and dirtying the name of his entire bloodline in order to avoid it. He is willing to rip his soul out of his body and deface his family's most prized heirloom to avoid it. He is willing to twist and warp and mangle his soul to avoid passing on, a pain unlike any your body could ever recreate, just to stay tethered. Something in his eyes just isn't there anymore. I don't even know if it's the same man. I have a delineation between what I like to call true necromancy and pseudo-necromancy in Atovia. Pseudo-necromancy is the reanimation of dead bodies, and in some cases, the reanimation of anything that has a humanoid form. And true necromancy is the editing of, the interaction with, any direct influence on or over a soul. A very similar idea that we have here actually in our cosmology of the flesh and the soul being sort of completely separate or separatable from one another and not being bound, but that still being sort of a grave thing to mess with. Those bounds of sort of the world's construction. I Am Crab 174 writes, The Greatest Sin. In a world full of so many diverse cultures with different values, it can be a little hard to name just one unforgivable sin, but there does happen to be one that's globally forbidden. Before the First Demon War, necromancy only had minor restrictions that were different between civilizations. The magic was hard enough to learn to begin with, so there wasn't much need for large-scale regulation. Most people just used it for contacting late family members or pets. This all changed when the Kin of Chaos formed, the first true cult of necromancers, started by a pair of elves working with a serpentine. Serpentine were one of the few races who believed in the story of the fight between chaos and creation that formed the world, but also the demonic realm. The trio intentionally summoned demons to bind with the elves, and then began building their cult. They preached breaking the barrier between the two realms and allowing demons to cross through and ravage everything. They believed that by doing so, they would be raised to gods by binding with more powerful demons. Eventually, they gained enough of a following and broke the barrier at the valley that was supposedly the dead god's heart, permanently causing a rift between the two worlds. This started the first Red Winter and the first Demon War, plunging the world into what was basically an apocalypse. It also severed the direct link the gods had to the world, cutting off most of their ability to directly interact with things in the mortal world. It took the combined forces of all the prevalent races to even stand a chance, and that still wasn't enough. Only when Flora and Fauna, two of the oldest goddesses, created the elements to help did they finally start pushing the demons back. With the help of the elements, the war was won, and powerful magic users were able to mostly seal the rift, though demons still found ways to come through because it wasn't able to be fully repaired. All the necromancers involved were caught and executed publicly, and all races came together to officially outlaw necromancy, making it punishable by death or worse. So, long story short, necromancy is without a doubt the greatest sin a person could commit in my world, and there's plenty damn good reason for it. Yep, we got a little bit... necromancy tends to be, in fantasy worlds that have the idea, one of the worst things that you can do, which I think is a fascinating lens on things that we still find extremely taboo or extremely touchy in most of our own real-world cultures. For day 451, the prompt was, how is a powerful person removed from their position? How are their followers handled? And this comes from Scrubsy-Boy844 in the Discord. Problem the Great writes, on second thought, an entry in What Lies West. Ira looks down with a grin on his face to the letter in his hands. I repeat that, on this day, the Orc Revolution and its effects on Koros have been successfully put to an end. I will report it in person to secure my promised reward for the Minotaur peoples. Expect my arrival within the hour this letter arrives. Father? Max speaks up within the silent office. He looks at Ira, expecting to hear the letter's contents. They've done it, boy. The beef men have brought the orcs to heel at long last. Ira takes a sip from his wine and smacks his lips slightly. Bring Amelia here, will you? I have other promises to fulfill. Marriage, isn't it a bit too... Silence. I will do as I want, child. Bring her here, now. Ira stares at Maximilian with fury in his eyes, anger at the very idea that his son would question him. Very well, father. I shall bring her here post-haste. Max leaves the room with a rapid near jog, almost slamming the door behind him if it weren't for its massive size. Ira stares deeply at more documents, the contracts made with the so-called demigod Imalesh. After seeing the Minotaur's effect on the war, it would be very, very unwise to refuse their demands. Ira has less than 2,000 soldiers left, a far cry from the previous 23,513, give or take an extra 1,000 or so. With a finger to his temple, Ira dips his pen and signs the papers. It's not right, he thinks. What could have been done, though? If only those damned knife ears hadn't gone and pissed off the hornet's nest in that mire, we would have been fine. The knocker on his office rings out 3 times. Enter, Ira says, just loud enough for it to carry through the mighty mahogany door. A small kobold heaves open the door just barely, straining his legs just to crack it ajar.
Lord Thaddeus, the fire tamer is here to see you urgently, he says. Shall I?
Send him in and don't dawdle. Ira stacks the papers neatly and prepares to place his wax seal onto the pile. He looks up to see the hulking figure of Imalesh pushing open the door fully. 2 other Minotaurs enter, fitting nicely through the threshold, but Imalesh places his hand on the top side of the frame, cracking the wall slightly with his might as he leans down to enter. Dawdle shirks away the moment Imalesh's ashen hoof enters the room. He skitters off to fulfill some other task and look too busy to bother. Imalesh's advisors walk silently despite their immense size compared to a man. Their cloaks betray no sign of movement as they glide to either side of the room. Imalesh, though, shakes the room slightly with each careful step. He is covered head to toe in silver plate, shin guards and a mighty armored skirt covering his loin. A cuirass adorned with black steel and gold embroidery rests on his torso. He removes and now holds a helm the size of a normal man's chest. It has hinges on it which allow it to be efficiently donned and doffed despite the unusual shape of a minotaur's head. In his other hand, a mighty black halberd clinks against the floor with each step. Small ashes fall from its haft with each light impact against the vibrant yellow rug, staining it with small specks of sallow gray. Ira grimaces slightly at the scene. He has just had that carpet made last week, and nobody but him was allowed to walk directly on it. Not that he would dare tell Imalesh that. Outwardly, Ira remains calm, but inside his thoughts betray his true feelings. Imalesh is haunting to him. The very thought that Imalesh could incinerate him in a moment, or cleave his head off, or rip him in twain, or... No, it's best not to think such things. Imalesh stops just before Ira's desk. He looks down at the small platter of meats and cheeses with wine and frowns slightly. You look comfortable, Thaddeus, enjoying your victory? Imalesh's words are like acid in the air. His breath is near molten, his speech laced with sparks. I am. Ira barely manages to look at him as Imalesh talks, squinting his eyes like you would when looking at a campfire. I have prepared everything. You and your people are granted permanent citizenship with the borders of the now perfect kingdom of Koros. Perfect. Immaculate, you say. Nary a man in rags on a corner, a sick man in a hospice, a hungry man daydreaming food on his table. Imalesh hides strikes in his words, no doubt. He means to belittle Ira by comparing his kingdom to its occupants. Who will make them houses now? Who will forge you new weapons? Who will starve in their place? Imalesh looks down more than ever at Iridine. His eyes squint narrowly, small specks of red light with a dim glow coming from his eyelids. A ridiculous question, no doubt. Now that you brought them to heel, it will be the greenskins, as it has been for centuries. Ira grins as if he aced some sort of quiz. Unfortunate, Ira. I had hoped this debacle would have made you realize something very, very important. Imalesh looks at his attendants for a moment before continuing. You will not be receiving more slaves. Not now, not ever. The demigod's grip tightens around his halberd. Ira's face goes through a slew of different emotions. Confusion, realization, finally landing on anger. What? Who do you think you are? You would deny me my property. Do you know how hard I have worked my entire life to get where I am now, you damnable whoreson? Ira stands up rapidly, pointing his fork up at Imalesh. If you did not do as I asked so perfectly, perhaps it would have been you on this plate, you half-spawned waste-crawler. You will bring me my trophies, you will drag them to me in chains, do you hear me? Ira took deep breaths as he stared angrily at the Minotaur. For a moment, nothing but his anger filled his mind, but after 3, maybe 4 seconds, he realized just what he had done. He makes an attempt to back up. Imalesh lets out a sigh, placing his helm down on the table before reaching over it and grabbing Ira by the chest. Ira winces at the impact and constriction of Imalesh's fingers, struggling in vain as he is raised up to meet the Minotaur eye to eye. You disgust me. Imlesh looks at Ira's twisted face with a frown. He takes in a deep breath before continuing. Have you learned nothing, old man? Is your brain as mottled as your skin, as bare of wrinkles as your head is of hair, your wits as gone as your virility? Look! Imlesh carries Ira out to his massive stained glass window. Below, his city stretches on to the horizon, 3 glorious miles of civilization. Or it would be. Do you see not a single smoke column from a fireplace? Nary a child in the streets. Your perfect kingdom is on its last legs. It's crumbling to pieces because of your mistakes, Ira. This is your fault. You will release the orcs from their bondage. Maybe, just maybe, I can convince some to remain, but even Orpheus would know that you are nothing but scum of the earth. Tell me, Ira, where is your wife? Sorry, your 13th wife, right? How desperate are you for love that failure after failure you seek it out just to fail again? Do you? Feel love, I mean? Imlesh turns and slams Ira onto his desk. He pulls a pistol from its brace and puts it against Ira's head. Does your son have hobbies? Does your daughter draw art? What about the others that could have been? What Kali have ever dreamt of riding a horse? Would Samuel ever had begged for a broadsword on his name day? Do you know why Max hasn't come back with his 7-year-old sister? Because she isn't here. All of your efforts to conquer and you will still die alone. All of this bloodshed, and yet it is you who will bleed a slow and painful end. Perhaps then I should end it for you. I'm sure Max would be more than happy to sign a simple piece of paper to save his own hide. What do you say, Ira? Should I ruin your family's victory with the end of their leader? No, that's impossible. It would only make it better, wouldn't it? Speak up, coward! On second thought, I believe I will sign the paper. I like that we finally got to see Imlesh interact with a regular human being, and probably really captured the dread and absolute fear anyone who is on sort of the receiving end of his wrath would be experiencing, and some really solid prose here in general. It's kind of cool. It's interesting and cool how grounded Imlesh appears to be for someone who's treated like a demigod. It's kind of a fun, very benevolent character, which I think we kind of already knew, and maybe makes sense considering how much of following he's sort of garnered. Nugget writes, violently, an entry in Petrichor. Violently. The Third Estate had been oppressed by the aristocracy long before Petrichor existed. People who go hungry become angry, and people who become angry become violent. Thaddeus was not the only voice behind the revolution, but he was certainly a very prevalent one. He was involved in the storming of the Bastille at the beginning of the Revolution, which put weapons and gunpowder in the hands of the Third Estate, but more importantly, sent a message. The next several years saw a rise in paranoia, with the council trying to figure out how to calm the waters when the revolution had already gotten a taste of blood. Thalia eventually hires Thaddeus to investigate her family, particularly the affairs of her father and the possible existence of an illegitimate heir. Even after it was found out that Thaddeus was the illegitimate child, Thalia still thought Thaddeus could be of use to her. He was given authority under the Vane House, giving him the power to make arrests as he deemed necessary. If the revolution was to happen, she'd rather have someone as loud as Thaddeus be under her thumb first, and for that, they might as well work together, even if tentatively. Thus starts the reign of terror as described by Thaddeus himself. Terror is nothing less than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. An age of anarchy and pure distrust in the Second Estate and Council led primarily by Thaddeus, starting with him seeking out legitimate reasons for arrests and actual betrayal of the Second Estate's own laws, gradually evolving to Thaddeus's own biases and reasons. It eventually becomes less about actual justice, but rather convincing Thaddeus or his associates that it needs to be done. During this time, many members of the Second Estate scattered as best they could, trying to bend to a movement that had already made up their minds or even abandoning everything they owned to avoid trying to be found. After an arrest is made, they can be held for days, weeks, or even months in prison, awaiting execution by the National Razor, better known as the guillotine. What better way to remove someone from power than removing their head from their shoulders? Lots of this is based off the French Revolution, which Nugget has talked about before, so we have a lot of these themes running through the whole thing, but with this emphasis on sort of these specific characters of Thalia and especially Thaddeus in this sort of vein of the Petrichor storyline. And I think it's a good reflection of the French Revolution, especially in its faults of the post-revolution era becoming a time of paranoia and power grabs and overutilization of the guillotine as much as possible, and plenty of other things that better historians could describe to you in a more adequate way, so I will stop for now. For day 452, the prompt was, what was the scariest individual event, action, or realization in your world? And this comes from The Wanderer and the Discord. The Wanderer writes, the Forbidden Realm has no dead, an entry in Endrin. One of the most terrifying individuals to ever live in Endrin is Zyria, the Queen of Undead. For those familiar with prior discussions about Endrin, the reasons are self-evident. For those new to my reports, among other things, she wounded death and raised every last thing that ever died back to life in an undead form, even ghosts. She discovered something about the Forbidden Lands that shook her deeply, and for an immortal lich-wielding godlike power, that isn't easy. Scholars researching her palace discovered her entry on it, entry translated to the common tongue from High Tavism. I have done it. Across everywhere, everything that has ever died has returned. In a few centuries' time, I will rule existence itself. Well, almost all of it. The Forbidden Lands have not been successful. I scoured the entire continent, and not a single thing there was dead. Something deeply wrong is afoot there. Nothing was dead, not a bacteria, in that entire landscape. This leads to only two conclusions. Either the entire landscape is cut off from every afterlife, its borders kill everything within it permanently with no recourse to be found, or secondly, nothing there is dead, nothing ever dies, not once in its countless eons of existence has something died. 3 destroyed passages. I will not be attempting to explore the Forbidden Lands. Nothing good will come of it. Something very strange and wrong is present, and I will not face it. Needless to say, the implications was strong enough that any and all efforts to go to the Forbidden Land was completely abandoned. If one of the most powerful individuals to ever live was scared of it, one who brought the world to its knees, what hope did anyone else have? Interesting. Feels like a bit of a Hunter x Hunter Dark Continent moment of, you have this crazy big area that is the regular Endrin sort of look, and then there is the Forbidden Lands that is something colossally scary, filled with immortal beings or something. It's kind of fun. That brings us to the end of the prompts, and now we will get into our Hammer Sparks. We only have one this time around, but I will remind people who are interested in having the writing read aloud that Hammer Sparks is a section for 3 slots, first come, first serve, that anyone can submit any writing, regardless of prompt affiliation or theming, that they would like read aloud, specifically writing for a homebrew setting or within a homebrew setting. Probin the Great writes, Grolls, rewritten, an entry in What Lies West. Groll, just the name says it all, huh? I can't imagine them being named anything else. I don't know who came up with it, but it's perfect. They're so slimy and squealy and just all kinds of disturbing. Amelia Harrow, Adventurer. Call signs. Moderate mind whispers. Distorted walls, floor, lighting, visibly described as shifted. Nosebleeds. Squealing sounds described as swine adjacent. Trails of fingernails and mucus. Grolls are monsters of the West that primarily reside in mundane ruins of the West, though they can be found anywhere with moisture condensation and have a particularly high population within the Forlorn Graveyard. Grolls are visibly incomprehensible, possessing near completely corrupted bodies comprised of eldritch energy, though unlike the harrowing null figures of 2 years ago, Grolls appear to have once been a naturally occurring animal that somehow miraculously adapted to the presence and power of the deep. Grolls, while visibly incomprehensible, can be physically interacted with to reveal certain pieces of their shape via touch. A surface of ever-shifting nails, like those found on the hand, make up a large, nearly flat surface on the underside of a Groll. These nails regularly shed off as the creatures move throughout the ruin, and each Groll's nails are very different in both shape and size to one another, leading to an idea that they serve to mark territory. Grolls also are undeniably in possession of numerous tendrils which serve as their only form of locomotion. Each tendril is tipped with some sort of barbed orifice, suggesting these appendages are where the Groll keeps its mouths. When alive, the form of a Groll is far harder to notice while it moves quietly inside the dark corridors of its home. Luckily, they possess an incredibly telling behavior: their squeals. Grolls will, without fail, break out into a shrill, pig-like scream when they see a creature, predator or prey. Scholars like myself believe that this serves entirely as an intimidation display, used to force prey into corners or to make a predator retreat. Grolls also will fake charges, bluffing numerous times to fake out their prey or to disturb their predators. For a regular mortal, looking at a Groll causes nausea, nosebleeds, and fatigue. Risen ones will still experience extreme nausea, but their lack of stomachs makes them susceptible to phantom vomit spells. This also can be used to find a Groll. As the head throbs upon direct eye contact with a Groll, one might use it to locate any hidden in plain sight. If one doesn't burn a Groll, though, their hide is the active resource in making cloaks of incomprehensibility. When fighting a Groll, spear thrusts and conflagratory weapons work best, with the latter often causing the Groll to flee. Grolls are also incapable of passing salt lines, further betraying their presence if they accidentally bump into one and the salt burns them. Lighting a Groll on fire results in a completely alien-looking sight, with the fire latching onto fourth-dimensional limbs otherwise non-interactable by humans and the like. This still increases their visibility, though, and can thus be used to keep track of them during combat. Holy water will cause a Groll to violently explode. While this instantly dispatches them, their blood and flesh can cause extreme mutations, and the shrapnel from whatever bones they have can cause severe bleeding. Blunt weapons do nothing to harm the blubbery flesh of a Groll. Grolls will attempt to eat many ruin-based fauna, including small thunderjaw nymphs, verdant whimsies, snatches, and even stray arcanosaurs. Still, thunderjaws and arcanosaurs often make the Groll their prey as well, with both creatures being the only non-eldritch beasts that can consume the flesh of the Groll. Abominations as well are not fans of anything with a pulse, including Grolls, but the Knights in Yellow can strangely be seen tracking the movements of a Groll, but not acting upon them. Chromatic Sentinels will smash any Grolls they see immediately. Now, you say rewritten. I'm assuming you rewrote. I don't know if I remember these at all, or maybe you gave them to us a while back and they were quite a bit different, but I really like this. Fantastic use of Eldritch stuff of like explanations for parts that are only perceivable via touch, that can't actually be seen. Some really, really solid stuff here. They sound pretty horrific. Would not want to be touching one, personally. That brings us to the end of Worldhammer Episode 10. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The more people that we can share all this wonderful writing with, the better. We will see you next time, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the Worldhammer.